The letter came wrapped in butcher paper and twine, as if the man who sent it were ashamed of its own thinness. Lark Delaney turned it over in her hands 3 times before she slit it with a kitchen knife, the edge catching on the grease-stiff cord. Outside, the noon wind carried the desert's bleached breath across the clapboard walls of her rental, rattling a loose shutter like a whispered dare. Inside, the single-room place smelled of coffee and gun oil and the leather of a saddle that had known more roofs than barns. Before she even pulled the folded page free, Lark knew what the letter said. She had known it through the hush that fell over the feed store when the postmaster called her name. She had known it in the careful way the old men kept their eyes low and their hands still, as if any sudden movement would disturb some sleeping thing between her boots and the door. She read the single sentence twice. Then a third time, because there was a shape beneath those 14 words, and she needed to measure it from every angle before it measured her back. Miss Delaney, pursuant to the late Elias Calder's testament, title to Harrowbone Ranch passes in full to the bearer of this letter. A slanted signature and an address. No condolences. No confession. Just a legal handoff of a rumor with fences. Lark exhaled slowly and folded the letter along its original crease, as if she might slip the weight back inside. And before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Pretend she had not opened the thing at all. The wind gusted and the shutter banged once. Somewhere north, a freight train mourned its way across an invisible cut through the basin. Harrowbone. Folks used the name like a curse or a dare, and sometimes the two were the same thing. She had ridden fence out that way once, years back when she still believed you could earn a place by the hours you gave the land. The ranch sat on a limestone shelf where the basin's hardpan puckered into low ridges, a place of shin-high grass that kept its color only in early spring and rattlesnakes that kept theirs year-round. It wasn't the emptiness people feared. It was what the emptiness hid. She packed in 30 minutes. The coffee pot got rinsed and left upside down to dry, the saddle got wrapped in a canvas sheet, the old 30-30 got checked, wiped, and set in its scabbard. Lark tied her hair in a knot at the base of her neck and studied herself in the warped mirror that came with the rental. She had eyes the color of oversteeped tea, a jaw that looked like it had refused softer shapes, and the narrow shoulders of a woman who had learned to take up little space and still make room for her will. On the way out, she slid the letter into her vest pocket. Its corners pressed through the cloth like the edges of a decision. The little mare she'd been working, Dusty Dunn with a dustier name, Cricket, took the saddle like it was a secret between them. Lark swung up and settled into the seat that had made more of a home of her than any room had in years. She pointed Cricket toward the north road where the basin had a habit of enlarging whatever a person carried with her. The town fell behind them with comfortless ease. At the fork where the county road became ideas more than maintenance, Lark saw the first sign. Someone had nailed it to a cedar post where the brush thinned, 2 boards crossed like a grave marker, a smear of black paint across their intersection, turn back. Underneath, a hand had added with a pocket knife, if you're smart. She was smart, but not that kind. She touched her heel to Cricket and took the narrow trail left by hooves and cattle and choices, the kind that bit deep into clay when it rained and powdered into flour when it didn't. The sky hung wide and merciless overhead, a blue so thin it looked like a lie. By late afternoon, dust turned the inside of Lark's mouth into a dry argument. She spat into the brush and tasted the old metallic note of weather coming. The basin knew how to lock its storms behind clear glass skies until the hour they were required, then the whole horizon came unstitched at once. Harrowbone appeared in stages, like a face slowly turning its worst side toward you. First the windmill skeleton, 3 long-legged triangles in a row, each one missing its head. Then the house, 2 stories, a veranda running the length of the south face, paint stripped to gray ladders. The barn kept its secrets behind sagging doors. The cattle pens out front had collapsed, rails fallen inward like ribs. Lark rode to the porch and stopped. Sometimes you know the past is about to leave its boot prints across your next days, and sometimes you only realize it after the mud has dried. She sat there long enough for the sun to make an idea of evening across the far line of mesquite, then swung down and tied Cricket to the porch post. The key was in the letter, tucked like a small dull blade into the envelope's bottom fold. Almost disappointingly ordinary, nickel-plated, teeth-worn. It fit the front door lock on the second try. When Lark turned it, the tumblers made a sound like a polite cough. The smell that came out had layers. Dust first. Old wood second. Then something else in the low register, a shadow of cold iron, the kind that rises out of dug earth and stays in your lungs longer than is friendly. She stepped inside. The entry hall was generous in the way of houses built by men who mistook square footage for forgiveness. A staircase rose straight ahead, its rail polished by hands both eager and reluctant. Right, a parlor. Left, a room with a long table and chairs like judges, each with a cracked seat. Farther back, a kitchen with a black-bellied stove, a pump sink, cupboards with glass panes like eyelids. Lark took in the quiet and sized it like you size a colt, testing which corner would blow first. The house was neither friendly nor hostile. It was something else, attentive. She couldn't have said why, except that the air felt slightly kinked, like a rope you coiled one way too long and now it remembered the shape even when you tried to straighten it. The letter hadn't included instructions. Elias Calder's name had carried plenty by itself. He had been the kind of man the basin makes as a challenge, all angles and rules, with a temper that moved across his land like wildfire, fast, bright, leaving behind the sort of ash you carry in your clothes for years. Lark had never worked for him directly, but once, when a drought took everything not nailed down, she'd taken day work on a fence line that touched the far south boundary of Harrowbone. She remembered the boundary riders going still when they crossed the arroyo. Men who joked about everything grew quiet. The cows stepped high there, like the ground had a mind to trip them. She made a place for her bedroll in the kitchen, where the plaster had let go in long spear-shaped peels and the ceiling's old watermarks mapped storms as if they were countries. She stoked the stove with kindling that was more mouse than wood, boiled water, and drank a cup of coffee that tasted like stubbornness. When she lay down, she folded the letter beneath her saddle as if a weight might keep the words from drifting free in the night. Sleep came fitful, then all at once. Lark dreamed that she rode fence along an edge that had not been there in the morning, the wire black and humming, the posts bending. When she reached to touch the top strand, it sang against her skin like a wet knife and turned her hand to smoke. She woke with her heart galloping and a taste half copper, half sky in her mouth. The stove had died, and the house had taken a long breath and held it. Morning brought the color back to things. Dust settled into warmer grays. The kitchen looked less like a patient and more like a problem. Lark boiled water, washed her face, and went looking for the room that would speak first. The study found her. Back of the hall, right side, a door with a lock plate that had been polished by one person alone. Inside, a desk of the kind that moves a man into it, big enough for ledgers and maps and the pile of hard decisions no one else would make. The drawers stuck and then came, each with the soft sigh of paper bruised by years. Lark found deeds wrapped in muslin, maps showing a spider web of arroyos and game trails, and a ledger thick as a calf's shoulder. She opened the ledger and found two hands. One, neat and sensible, belonged to a bookkeeper who believed numbers were a way to keep madness inside boxes. The other, written over the first in darker pencil with slanted anger, belonged to Elias Calder. His notes crossed through columns and wandered margins. He made arithmetic like a man made fences, a way to pen things that did not want to be held. Midway through, something changed. The neat hand kept tally of cattle and salt and wages. The slanted one began making notes in a different tone. Lark read 4 entries and felt the house tilt under her boots. June 3rd, riders refused night pasture north of the sinkhole. 3rd night the cattle crowd south fence. No coyote sign. No cat sign. Something else. June 8th, put lamps at north pens. Fire burned in clean wind. Heard it again from the flats near the old arroyo, metal under earth. No. A shape of sound. Tom says it's wind. Tom lies. June 13th, salt line on the ridge disturbed. No tracks. Sand smoothed itself. Women whisper of the breath. I will not have it. Ordered all to keep named business to daylight. June 17th, found calf in the wash this morning. No blood. Hide like glass. Mouth shut as if stitched but nothing to see. Sent the women to the church. Lark set the ledger down. Her heartbeat had moved into a place just under her ribs where it could be heard by anyone who wanted to listen. She closed her eyes and let the room stand still around her. She had eaten hunger as long as she could remember, slept exhaustion like it was a pillow, and learned that most things people feared were simply things people didn't understand. But this was different. This was a man like Elias Calder pushing back against something that did not push back the way men do. She took the ledger and walked the house with it, looking for the scene between rumor and fact. The second-floor rooms held nothing more than an exodus. Mattresses slashed. Wardrobes empty. The nursery had a rocking horse with only one ear. When she set it gently back on all fours, it moved once on its own and shuddered to stillness. In one of the bedrooms, the mirror had been lifted clean from the wall and set face down on the floor, as if the last woman who used it had decided she didn't want to know which direction the truth would come from. Outside, the day warmed. Lark saddled Cricket and rode the yard in slow circles, letting the mare's ears tell her where to look. The windmill bones gave nothing. The barn door resisted, then grudgingly let the light in. Inside, a loft half-fallen sagged like a broken back. The ground floor held a workbench with tools arranged in a symmetry that might have comforted someone who did not know what problem they were meant to solve. In a corner, stacked neatly, 6 wooden crates with stenciled letters that had blurred into suggestion. Lark pried one open with the claw of a hammer and found oil lamps wrapped in newspaper, dozens of them. In the next, she found coils of wire, thicker than fence wire and with a skin like dull pewter. In the third, salt. 50-pound sacks, their seams stitched in such careful lines it felt like they were meant to be noticed. She took one of the lamps and trimmed its wick, found a bottle of kerosene and filled its belly. When she struck a match, the flame came up like a decision that had been waiting its moment. Lark held its light against the barn's walls and saw what she would have missed in daylight alone, marks at ankle height and knee height, along the boards and flaring over the stalls, thin and pale, like something had been dragged there and then changed its mind. The marks weren't scratches. They were polish. As if many hands had touched the wood in the same place for a very long time. Hands that did not care for splinters. She put the lamp back in its crate and closed the barn. Toward evening, she rode to the north pastures the ledger had named. The land there made no sense. A stand of mesquite clung to a thin seam of water that did not exist in any sane month. Beyond the trees, the ground dipped into a shallow basin, and in the center of that dip lay a sinkhole the size of a kitchen table. She dismounted and approached it on foot. The hole was not deep. 3 feet maybe. Its edges were clean and almost circular, like a mouth that never healed. Lark knelt and touched the rim. The limestone felt worn down in a way no weather could manage. The dirt inside the hole had a darker tone than the ground around it. If she bent close, the air above it felt a degree cooler, as if the mouth led down into a throat. She sat back on her heels and listened. After a moment, she realized what was wrong with the place. The flies avoided it. She hadn't noticed for all the other noticing. Everywhere else on this bone-dry ranch the flies obeyed their one law, to go where the living and the dying intersect, but here they kept a steady perimeter, as if the center of that circle held something even they could not collect. The ledger had called it the breath. Lark did not intend to call it anything until it named itself. She set her palm flat on the rim and waited. At first, there was nothing. Then under her hand the stone took on the faintest pulse, so faint she might have imagined it if the hairs on her forearm had not raised their own hackles. Wind, she said to herself, and stood. Her voice sounded serviceable in the dry air. Cricket tossed her head once and stamped, as if she had opinions but no words for them. On her way back to the house, Lark noticed a line half buried in the dust. It ran straight as a sermon from the sinkhole toward the ridge. Not a trail. Not a water line. Something else. She dismounted and knelt again, brushing the dirt back with her glove until her knuckles tapped iron. She dug with her hands and then with a short-handled shovel she kept in a vine-wrapped scabbard on Cricket's saddle. An inch below the surface, a metal cable lay in the earth, thick as a man's thumb, wrapped tight in a gray skin that cracked under her blade and showed a darker metal beneath. It had no right to be there. It had every right in the world. Lark traced it 20 yards before the ground turned stubborn. She marked the place with a cairn of stones and straightened up slowly. The basin had gone quiet in that way it does right before dusk, when the light chooses sides and the shadows guess wrong. She swung into the saddle and rode home at a trot. In the kitchen, Lark lit 2 lamps and set them apart like witnesses. She laid out the ledger and a strip of rawhide and the key. The house stood around her with its chin lifted, and she felt the particular loneliness a person feels when she has no one to share the size of a thought with. She ate jerky and dried peaches and washed them down with water that tasted like its bucket. Then she wrapped her hands with the rawhide and went looking for the cellar. The door down was in the pantry, a square cut into the floorboards with an iron ring set flush to the wood. Lark squatted and tugged the ring. The door did not want to move. She pushed her shoulder against it, then her back, then finally set the tip of her boot under the edge and pried until the boards sighed and came up like a held breath being let out through teeth. The smell hit her first. Not rot. Not mold. A clean cold like the inside of a well just before a bucket hits. She lowered a lamp into it and then herself, the ladder rungs complaining under her weight but not failing. The cellar had a low ceiling, brick walls, and a floor tamped hard by time. Shelves lined the far wall, the kind that once held preserves and pickled pride. They were empty now except for a scatter of jars with cloudy glass and a mouse nest abandoned long enough ago to have become a doctrine of dust. On the near wall, a door waited. Not wood. Iron. Set into the brick so that the brick learned to take its shape. It had a keyhole to fit the key in Lark's vest. She stood very still. If you hold still long enough, any room will tell you its true dimensions. The cellar was smaller than it first appeared. It had room for a woman to stand in wonder and not much else. The iron door swallowed more space than the rest of the foundations combined. Lark lifted the lamp and held it close to the metal. The surface had a strange finish, not rust, not paint. Something like heat once, and then cold again. A memory of tempering. In the places where the finish had worn thin, she could see faint marks, like letters that had never finished becoming themselves. The key slid into the lock with the relief of a long-avoided chore. Lark hesitated. She thought of Elias Calder's ledger and the calves in the wash and the line buried under the dirt like an artery. She thought of the men who had fled this house with their mirrors turned down. "Names or leashes," she said softly. "I'll open, and you can tell me yours." She turned the key. The mechanism moved not with the expected catch-release jerk, but with a dark smoothness that made the back of Lark's neck prickle. Something heavy shifted beyond the threshold, and she felt it through the soles of her boots, not as motion but as a change in what the ground wanted from her weight. The door opened an inch. Then two. Cold breathed out, not winter cold, not grave cold. A clean room cold. The kind that belongs to stone that has never seen light. Lark lifted the lamp higher and eased the door wider. The glow spilled past her knuckles and fell on a set of stairs going farther down. Iron steps. Iron rail. The walls were stone dressed as if by a careful hand that did not like to be hurried. The lamp flame leaned toward the new air like a colt toward a palm full of salt. She descended. The steps carried her 30 feet under the foundation. She counted without meaning to. At the bottom, the stairs ended in a short corridor with a second door. This one was wood, or had been. Whatever had sealed it had been broken and resealed many times, the scars of the work layered like growth rings in a tree. A hand-painted mark scratched across the planks had been almost erased by fingers and time. She could barely make it out. A circle. A line through it. A second circle inside the first. Lark set the lamp on the floor and touched the wood with 2 fingers. It felt cool and stubborn, the way a mule feels when it knows there's a cliff a half-mile beyond your insistence. She put her shoulder into it anyway. The door gave, grudging, and then suddenly. She stumbled into a room the size of a small chapel and stopped where she was because stopping was the only thing a sensible heart could do. The chamber's vault rose into a shallow arch. A channel cut into the floor ran from a low stone basin at the far wall to a drain in the center, where iron grates formed a lattice too precise to be ranch work. The walls were carved, not with saints or animals, but with patterns of circles and lines connected in a geometry that irritated the eye. At eye level, recessed into the far wall, 3 niches held 3 objects under dusty glass: a brass disc, a bundle wrapped in oiled canvas, and a ledger thinner than the one upstairs but bound in a skin that was not cow and not deer and not anything Lark could name just then without lying to herself. On a narrow table beneath the niches, a set of tools lay arranged with the same reverent precision as the lamps in the crate: tongs, a ladle with a lip too exact for cooking, a set of calipers, and a shallow dish with a lip worn by careful pouring. Beside them, a coil of that same pewter skin cable she'd found in the north pasture rested like a sleeping snake. The cold air had a shape. It walked the room like a person who knew where everything belonged and did not love visitors. Lark set the lamp on the table and studied the nearest wall. The carvings were not random. They recorded something: positions, distances, alignments between the circles and a fixed point she could not find. In the shallow basin, she saw the residue of something that had once dried in smooth flat layers. Salt, her nose said. Not just any salt. A nurse's salt. The kind that pulls whatever is trying to fester out of a wound and into the air where it can die. You built this, she said to the empty room. Or you found it and decided you needed something to pretend you had built. She didn't speak loudly. She spoke to make a shape her mind could stand up inside of. She lifted the glass over the brass disc. Her hand shook a little. The disc was heavy and colder than the air around it. Symbols, letters or numbers or a language that did not know it was supposed to be one or the other, scored its surface in concentric rings. At the center, a small pinhole. The edges were beveled, as if the disc were meant to sit in a seat. Lark set it back down and looked at the second niche. The bundle and oilcloth had been sealed with wax and then resealed so many times the original knot had become a question. She worked it open with her thumbnail, lifting the stiff cloth away inch by inch. Inside, wrapped in a rag cut from a woman's dress, lay a set of field notes tied with red twine. Elias Calder's hand again. A different tone still. Do not call it a machine. Machines describe their hunger with noise. This makes almost none. Salt ring reduces it to sleep. Cable like a nerve. Disc the only mouth it uses. Do not feed it from the house. Do not feed it from the hands. The women say it is older than us. I say it is exactly as old as the need a man has to own what he does not understand. When it breathes, the calves come wrong. When it sleeps, the well water sweetens. Tom put his ear to the disc. He does not speak anymore. If I die before this is put right, put it right. If you cannot, bury it the way it asks to be buried, with witnesses and a story. Lark felt the anger rise in her like heat after frostbite. It did not surprise her. Elias had always seemed the type to make a problem sacred because that way he never had to solve it. But he had done more here than sanctify a fear. He had built a chapel around it. She lifted the last glass. The thin ledger was lighter than its binding suggested. Inside, the pages were filled edge to edge in a careful hand that was neither bookkeeper nor rancher. She recognized it without knowing why. Teacher, maybe. A woman's hand that had learned to make the world line up because the world refused to do it for her. The first entry was dated 12 years before the one upstairs that spoke of the calf in the wash. We came on a day when wind pulled the shirts off the line and the children went silent. Elias would not listen. He called the line a utility and the sinkhole a fault. But it is neither. It is a mouth. And mouths speak when the right questions are asked. We asked wrong. The ledger between Lark's fingers blurred and then steadied. The entries moved from observation to insistence to a kind of begging that made her jaw tighten. The disc is a lens. Not for eyes. For pressure. When you set the coil and align to the marks, the air bends and the room bends with it. Elias says it is a fault in the limestone. I have been in fault caves my whole life. This is not limestone talking. This is an instrument listening. We do not speak of the boy. The boy would make it a story. The boy would give it teeth. Lark closed the ledger and set it down gently, as if anything other than gentleness would wake a sleeping dog. She looked around the room once more, tracing the carved lines with her eyes, measuring the distance from the basin to the grate to the table to the niches. The shapes the walls made were not random. They formed a kind of compass, with the disc at the true center. Lark reached for the coil of cable and felt the hair on her arms rise again. The coil had a skin of metal, but under her palm there was something else, a pressure like a heartbeat in reverse, as if the thing wanted nothing more than to be still and the world kept moving under it anyway. Not a machine, she said to the ledger's last thought. Fine. She followed the cable with her hand along the floor to where it disappeared under the door and into the corridor. Up the stairs and into the cellar into the pantry floor where she had found the iron ring. If she had the patience to strip the board edges and the floor joists in the soil, she guessed she'd find the line tracing from this room to the north pasture sinkhole. A loop. Along. At dusk, the air changed. Not in the way weather changes when the sky makes a promise and cashes it late. In the way a sleeping animal changes when a bootheel crushes a twig within its own dream. The house settled again, the wind quieted, somewhere far off a coyote made 3 short yips as if he'd decided against a longer song. Lark looked at the disc, then at the salt-scarred basin. She thought about names and leashes, instruments and worship, saints and cattle. She thought about the boy nobody in the book wanted to name. There were ways to test the thing that did not involve feeding it. She lifted the dish with the worn lip and filled it in the kitchen with plain water. Back in the chamber, she set the dish on the table, leveled its surface with the flat of her hand, and watched the lamp's flame draw itself into the small circle the water made. The surface held. Then it did not. A ripple moved across it, slow as a thought. It hit the edge, came back, met its own tail, and made a small diamond in the center where water insisted and the world said not now. Lark leaned closer and saw that the diamond was not 2 ripples trying to occupy the same place, it was a place trying to occupy 2 ripples. Lens, she said. Not for eyes. She moved the dish by an inch and watched the ripple change its speed. Another inch. Another change. When she set the dish at a point precisely beneath the smallest of the carved circles, the water went perfectly still and showed her face back to her in a way mirrors rarely manage. Not exactly as she was, but as a patient wild thing that might turn into her if she did not spook at first. All right, she said. All right. She returned the dish to the table and took up the brass disc. She did not set it anywhere. She simply held it in both hands and let the room choose. After a moment, her palms found an angle that made the disc hum. Not out loud. In her bones. The hum had a temperature. It was the temperature of a nail head left in the sun and then hidden in shade. Not enough to burn. Enough to make you remember you had nerves. Lark lifted the disc an inch higher. The hum dropped an octave. She lowered it, the hum climbed. She turned her left wrist and felt the sound move into the seams of the chamber, along the carved lines and into the grates in the floor. The channel from the basin to the drain trembled, not physically. In some other language walls used to tell floors what they're for. This was the moment when a man like Elias would call it discovery and a woman like the ledger's author would call it danger. Lark called it a door. She set the disc on the table and wrapped it in the rag again. The window of night had opened enough to make her own blood sound loud in her ears, and she had no intention of walking into it blind. She snuffed the lamp with a careful pinch, lifted it to make sure the wick had truly died, and climbed back up through the iron door to the cellar. When she heaved the pantry door shut, the house seemed to nod. She slid the bolt into place and leaned her shoulders against the boards until they took the weight without complaining. The first footsteps came 3 hours later. They were soft. 3 sets, maybe 4, crossing the yard with the skitter of caution. Lark woke with her hand already around the stock of the 30-30. She blew the kitchen lamp high enough to read the door and not bright enough to give away angles. The sound of leather dragging across the veranda told her where they were. The whisper between a man who did not want to speak and another who did not want to listen told her when they reached the knob. She did not go to the door. She went to the window to the left of it, set her shoulder in the frame, and waited. The knob turned slowly. The latch clicked. The door did not open. Lark put her mouth near the seam of the window and spoke in the low even tone that belongs to people whose authority has never been borrowed. "Try the hinge side." The knob froze. The whispering stopped. Someone drew a breath to shape a name and failed to let it go. She waited another beat. "If you're here to warn me off, save it. If you're here to make a deal, say the terms. If you're here for something else, step back so I can see your boots." Silence until the bravest of them took a half step that made the boards complain. Lark saw the outline of a hat brim and the shadow in the house's light of a jaw that wanted to be mean. "Miss Delaney," the mean jaw said. "Folks in town figure you don't know what you inherited, and it'd be a kindness to take it off your hands." "Kindness," Lark said. "Name the price." "You misunderstand." The hat tilted. "Price is what I bring you on a plate instead of what I take out of here in sacks." "Ah," Lark said. "Kindness with a hinge." Behind the hat brim, a second man shifted his weight, and the floorboards told her he carried more than meanness. A third pair of boots did not move at all, and that told her about money. "Tell Mr. Lyle to wait by the barn," she said to the still boots. "He has the sense to keep his face out of the first offer." That brought the breath someone had been holding out into the night. A low curse. A scrape of a heel. The still boots retreated. The mean jaw laughed. "You've opinions for a woman alone." "I've opinions for a person who can count pairs of feet," Lark said. And the deserts never met a man who was less alone than he thought. A pause. Then, "We're here for what's under the pantry. You hand it over now, and nobody needs to get their mother awake over it." "Your mother sleeps on the North Ridge," Lark said quietly, and the mean jaw's teeth clicked together at the mention of graves. "Tell me how you know there's a what beneath that pantry." "The man who built it bought cable at the rail yard," the second voice said, "the one carrying weight. And paid cash to a man who knows how to keep track of the kind of men who pay cash." "Cables used in wells and windmills," Lark said. "Not this cable," the second voice said. "Not unless your wind drinks iron." They knew more than guessing. They knew enough to be dangerous and not enough to stay alive. Lark let her breath out the way the stove did when it settled into coals. "You want what's under the pantry," she said. "What's the plan if I hand it over?" "We haul it out," the mean jaw said. "We load it up. We take it to a place where men who aren't farmers can decide how to price it for what it is." "And what is it?" Lark asked. "A thing that breeds money," the mean jaw said. "You ask too many questions. Questions keep me from burying the wrong parts when the men who don't farm bury themselves," Lark said. Something moved on the veranda that touched Lark's old memory. A small shift. A young man. Boots not yet broken to his feet. The third set. She swallowed down the reflex to soften her tone at the thought and kept her voice even. "Come back at daylight," she said. "Bring Mr. Lyle and leave the boy at home. We'll decide how to keep you from dying for the wrong prize." "You're coming out now," the mean jaw said, and she heard the clumsy courage of a man who only knew one hinge for every door. The boy's breath hitched. The second man exhaled. The mean jaw turned the knob. Lark lifted the 30 to 30 and worked the lever. The sound filled the kitchen like a decision. The porch went still. She waited. Everything waited. Even the house. "Last offer," she said. "Daylight, with the thinking part of your outfit. Or now, with the part that will look wrong on a table." Boots retreated. The boy first. The second man next. The mean jaw lingered long enough to speak something through his teeth. "You don't know what that thing is, Miss Delaney." "I know what it isn't," she said. "What's that?" "Yours." Their steps moved off across the yard. Lark watched the black between lamplight and moonlight until her eyes stopped trying to make faces out of it. The young one glanced back once. She saw the small white of his shirt collar flash, then vanish. She did not sleep again. She sat at the table until first light made the window a square of pale confusion. Then she stood, rolled her sleeves, and opened the pantry door. Down in the chamber, the night had left a kind of stillness that made the lamp burn taller. Lark set the brass disc on the table and stripped her gloves off. She poured a ring of salt into the basin and laid a line across the threshold until it looked like the horizon had collapsed and left a straight bright scar on the floor. Then she did the thing she had told herself she would not do, because no wise person does the thing she tells herself she will not. She took the coil and fed its head through the small seat beneath the disc until the pinhole lined him perfectly with the tiny notch shaved into the lip of the table. When she pressed it that last unkind inch, the room changed the way a church changes when a widow walks in first. The air grew heavy in her ears. The lamp flame leaned and held its lean. The channel from the basin to the grate became a line that the rest of the room could not ignore anymore. The carved marks along the walls brightened, though no light touched them. Lark put one hand on the table and one on her thigh and set herself like a rider does when the colt makes up its mind which direction it will buck. The first breath came like a sigh swallowed instead of released. Then the next. The chamber did not fill or empty. It flexed. The way a chest flexes when a person holds her breath through pain and chooses to live anyway. "You will not eat my hands," Lark said softly, because she needed to be the one doing the telling. "You will not eat my cattle or my stray or the boy who looked back." The hum returned, 2 octaves lower than before, a note pressed through stone and the thin places of the world. The water dish quivered and then smoothed, and a small perfect circle appeared in the center, no ripple, no mark. A place older than motion. The coil's skin warmed. Not hot, but present, the way a wound presence is present even when the bleeding has stopped. Lark traced the length of cable to the hole under the door, to the corridor, to the stairs, to the pantry, to the kitchen, to the yard, to the north pasture, to the sinkhole. She felt it in the bones of the house, as if the ranch had finally told her its true name and then asked, in the quiet way land asks, for her to say it back and mean it. Boots on the porch. Daylight proofs. Lark let the hum set all the tools ringing in their own metal throats and climbed the stairs at a pace that would not reveal anything to a man watching her eyes. She opened the front door. 3 men stood at the bottom of the steps. Mr. Lyle, tall and careful, hat brim low like a man who knew he had more to lose. The second, broad through the shoulders, carrying his weight like a hired animal. The third, the mean jaw, his grin a notch cut with a dull knife. "Fresh morning," Mr. Lyle said, and raised his hat just enough to prove he understood what civility cost. "Fresh enough," Lark said. "You left the boy at home." Mr. Lyle's eye moved once, tiny, toward the mesquite. It told Lark exactly where the boy wasn't. She let it pass. "We came to make terms," Mr. Lyle said. "So nobody's mother needs waking." Lark stood with the sun at her left shoulder so the light threw her shadow across the boards like a guard dog. "Speak them. You put the keys and whatever makes that breathing in our hands," he said. "We give you cash you can leave with before sundown. You walk, we haul." "And if I say no?" Lark asked. Mr. Lyle's mouth twitched a small regret. "Then my friend here," he tipped his hat toward the mean jaw, "will learn a new trade in locks." "Try it," Lark said, with such clean weariness that Mr. Lyle looked for the joke and could not find it. The mean jaw started up the steps. The hum in the house changed. The line from the basin to the grate drew tight as a wire pulled across a canyon. Lark felt it under her boots, not begging, not threatening. Simply stating. She put out her hand and laid it on the porch post. "Mr. Lyle," she said. "The thing under my pantry is a lens. The cable is a nerve. The sinkhole is a mouth. And you're about to stick your head in it and see what it bites first. That's not a threat. It's a list." Silence. Even the flies kept their counsel. The broad-shouldered man shifted to ease a knee. He looked like a man who might do arithmetic if someone put the numbers where he could see them. "What happens if it bites?" he asked, not belligerent. Pure inquiry. "The calves come wrong," Lark said evenly. "The water sweetens. The walls remember they were meant to be circles. And men who put their ears where they shouldn't don't speak again." The mean jaw snorted. "Fairy tales. Then they won't trouble you," Lark said. "Go ahead and fetch your picks." Mr. Lyle looked from her face to the house and back again. He had the sort of intelligence that does not cut itself to ribbons on pride. He could almost taste the shape of the thing he would regret. "Cut it loose," he said finally to the broad-shouldered man, not taking his eyes off Lark. "From where?" the man asked. "From wherever she's fed it," Mr. Lyle said softly. "The pasture, the yard, wherever that cable lays its sleep. Take 2 men. Leave me 1. You," he nodded to the mean jaw, "stay at the door. Be polite." The big man went. Lark did not move. The hum in the house shifted again, and in its chest she felt the decision a creature makes when you corner it and it chooses you over the hole it could disappear into. "Miss Delaney," Mr. Lyle said, voice low so the mean jaw would have to strain to hear. "You and I both know there are only 2 kinds of power in the basin, the kind with a paper trail and the kind with a story trail. I prefer paper. You prefer neither. But the story under your pantry has a momentum I didn't sign up to be cancelled by." "Then don't," Lark said. "What I'm saying is, I'll pay you to let me be a rumor. Right now, I'm on a porch. By sundown, I could be a moral." "And what moral would that be?" Lark asked. "That men who don't farm should leave the mouths of the earth to the women who do," he said, not smiling. "Or something to that tune." The mean jaw made a sound like a man who heard money slipping by and did not know whether to grab or shoot. "You getting soft, Lyle?" "I'm getting older," Mr. Lyle said. "Which is a form of soft that saves funerals." From the north pasture came a shout. Then a second. Then that note of awe that turns men's anger into either prayer or panic. "They found your nerve," Mr. Lyle said mildly. "Let's see whether I'm paying to be a rumor or a pallbearer." They walked to the ridge together without pretense that they were anything but opposing knives in a single drawer. The mean jaw trailed, muttering. At the sinkhole, the big man had already begun to dig. The cable lay under 2 inches of soil, exactly where Lark had marked it with stones. He had uncovered 6 feet of it and was cutting strips of the gray skin with a knife meant for meat. "Stop there," Lark said. "We ain't cut nothing yet," the mean jaw sneered. "That's why I'm asking politely," Lark said. The big man paused. "Feels wrong," he admitted. "Like a string across a canyon." "Yeah," the mean jaw said. "Feels like money under dust to me." He knelt and set the blade under the skin, turned it to lever, and looked up at Lark with an expression that wanted to be proof. Lark nodded to the big man. "Keep your hands clear." "What happens if," he started. The mean jaw pulled. The skin split with a sound like wet cloth. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the low hum in the ground rose hard enough to make the men step back. The sinkhole exhaled. Dust lifted in a ring and hung there like a halo for something that did not deserve one. The big man swore and stumbled. Mr. Lyle put a hand out to catch him and nearly fell into the hole with him. "Put it back," Lark said, calm as she could make herself. "Put what back?" the mean jaw said, but his knife hand had gone soft. "The skin," Lark said. "It's not armor. It's a bandage. You don't pull a bandage off a thing that hasn't stopped bleeding." Mr. Lyle shoved the knife away, took the gray strip, and pressed it back against the cable with both palms like a doctor working a wound. The big man joined him, hands big enough to believe in. The hum climbed another note and then settled, not to what it was before, but to a place near where it could be coaxed. The boy, who had not stayed home, stepped from the mesquite where he'd been hiding and looked at the sinkhole with a face both terrified and hungry. Lark met his eyes and saw a dozen futures and picked the one that didn't require burying him before she learned his name. "What's your handle?" she asked. "Pike," he said, too quickly not to be a lie born of a nickname too proud to be his own. Pike, Lark said. Go to the barn. Bring me that coil of wire wrapped in canvas on the workbench. Don't touch anything else. Don't look at anything else. And don't step in your own shadow while you do it. Pike looked at Mr. Lyle, who nodded once without removing his hands from the cable. The boy ran. They stood there with their palms on the skin of the nerve like people praying at a wall, while beneath them the ranch took a measured breath. Lark felt the chamber move under her in the way a pain moves from one place to another when it cannot decide what to name itself. She counted to 60. Then another 60. The hum found a rung and stayed there. Now we talk, Mr. Lyle said, not looking up. We leave the skin on. We leave the mouth fed just enough to sleep. We write a price that buys me out of my worst idea and buys you out of being alone with yours. Your worst idea, Lark said softly, was thinking you could carry this one without it learning your shape. And yours, he said, a line of sweat running from under his hat brimmed down his temple, was thinking a woman on a ranch is ever alone. Pike returned in a run, coil in his arms. Lark took it and wrapped the cable strip section with a gentleness that made the big man swear again, but this time in relief. The hum settled lower still. The dust ring around the sinkhole sank in place. Get off my land, Lark said. Mr. Lyle exhaled through his nose, then nodded. I'll send a man with paper, he said. You don't have to sign it. But if you don't sign something, another kind of man will come, and he'll bring more boys with shirts too white. I'll write my own paper, Lark said. You can sign that. I might, Mr. Lyle said, surprising himself. He looked at Pike. You just got promoted to errand runner. The mean jaw opened his mouth. Mr. Lyle's look made him close it again. They left with a dignity that cost them each a pint of pride. Lark watched them cross the yard and waited until their horses had swallowed the first 100 yards of dust before she let her shoulders sag against the fence post. She did not get to sag long. From the ridge west of the house, a sound began that did not belong to cattle or men or storms. It was lower than thunder and higher than the ground. The hum under her boots answered like a tuning fork called across a canyon. The sinkhole's dust ring shivered once. The flies dropped out of the air. Lark turned and saw, for the first time since she had put the disc in its seat, the thing the ledger's careful hand had refused to draw. On the far ridge, where the limestone outcropped in a jagged smile, the rock itself flexed, just once, a ripple from left to right like the thin skin between a horse's shoulder and its rib when a fly lands and is not wanted. The flex passed. The rock went back to being rock. The sound did not. Lens, Lark said again, this time as if her voice could make an order out of a revelation. Not for eyes. For pressure. She ran. In the chamber, the lamp burned with a tall steady flame that made the air look like a glass held at the wrong angle. The dish of water still held the small perfect circle at its center. The salt in the basin rose, not in grains but in a single skin that wrinkled as if being breathed through from the other side. The coil on the table hummed and then fell quiet. The brass disc sang in her palms when she lifted it. The sound from the ridge answered. The chamber's carved circles did not glow, not exactly. They agreed. Lark set the disc on the table and pressed 2 fingers to the lip of the drain. It was cold. Then it wasn't. Then it was again, like the body of a horse left standing too long in the spring wind. A floorboard creaked above her. Lark snapped the lamp wick low and listened. The kitchen door sighed. Someone entered the house without the grace to be invited or the sense to wait. The steps crossed the kitchen, paused near the pantry, and then moved on into the hall. Upstairs, one of the bedroom doors opened and closed. Another footstep. A whisper. Another door. She exhaled and let her muscles move the way they insist on moving when you've spent a life teaching them whose life it is. She climbed the stairs. She slid the pantry door shut and set the bolt. In the hall, the light along the floorboards had the new flatness of late afternoon. She held the 30-30 in her right hand, lowered, and kept her left against the wall so the house could tell her if it needed to say something fast. The steps were in the second bedroom on the left, the one with the mirror face down. Lark stood in the doorway and saw her visitor in the fraction of a breath it took him to realize what he had done. He was 20, maybe. Pike's brother or cousin, in the way the basin makes families out of shared bad luck. He had a pistol tucked in his belt with the carelessness of a man taught to trust an object more than his own slowness. He stood at the mirror, hands flat on the frame, as if he had gone there to do one thing and discovered halfway through that his body had decided to do another. "Step back," Lark said. He did not move. "It's not glass," he said, voice tight. "It's thicker." "It's glass," Lark said. "Thicker than the kind meant for men who say the word mirror like a prayer. Lift your hands." He lifted them. She raised the rifle and tilted the mirror up with the barrel's tip. Dust shed itself in sheets. The glass reflected the room and the boy and Lark herself. Then it did not. The surface rippled once and settled, and the room it held was not the room they stood in but the chamber below, as if the glass had chosen honesty over habit. The boy swore softly. "Names," Lark said, because if she said the boys, she would know it later when it mattered. "What do they call you?" "Finn," he said, and winced, as if the sound had pulled a tooth in his past. "Finn," Lark said. "Put your hands back on your own knees and step away from that glass like it offered you a debt you don't have the coin to pay." He obeyed, but his eyes clung to the mirror, to the carved circles reflected there in the basin and the disc sitting like a puckered mouth waiting for a question. His hand moved without him. Lark saw it before he did. She didn't lower the rifle. She didn't threaten. She said the one thing that might matter. "I don't bury boys," she said, and she meant it so thoroughly that the floorboards stopped humming long enough to listen. Finn stopped. His breath hitched like Pike's had the night before. For a heartbeat, the youngness of him fell off and she saw the shape of the man inside it, a shape that would kill him or make him useful depending on which hand tipped first. Below them, the chamber sighed. The mirror settled back into ordinary glass. Finn blinked and became 20 again. "Go downstairs," Lark said. "Fetch a bucket of water and a shovel. We've got to right a fence where a door used to be." "What kind of fence?" he asked. "The kind men can't walk through just because they think they know what hinges are," Lark said. He went. Lark watched him go and waited for the moment the floorboards would tell her he had decided to do something unforgivable instead. The boards kept their language private. She let a breath out through her teeth like a horse would after a hard climb. By the time they had fenced the pantry with a ridge of salt as tall as a palm and lined the threshold with canvas folded 8 times, the sun had gone down in the way it goes down fastest when you need it to slow. Finn worked steady, quick, obedient to the rhythm of a job that has no room for speech. When they finished, he looked at her with eyes that did not ask permission to be proud. "Now you leave," Lark said. He swallowed. "Pike." "He's alive," Lark said. "For now." "Tell him to stay that way." Finn hesitated. "If it needs feeding," he said, not asking and not telling, "how do you know when to stop?" "I don't," Lark said. "But I know what happens if I pretend it doesn't eat at all." He nodded, as if the sounds had snapped into a shape he could carry. He left without looking back at the mirror. She watched until the yard's darkness took him. Alone, Lark set the lamp in the window and turned the wick down low. She put her palms on the kitchen table and closed her eyes and listened to the ranch breathe around her. Somewhere, an owl took off from the cottonwood by the wash with a sound like a dress being lifted. The hum in the pantry held steady. The house decided, for now, to be a house. She might have slept an hour. Maybe 2. When she woke, the lamp had burned itself into a small, glass-eyed stare. The hum had moved. Not louder. Not quieter. Closer. Lark picked up the 30-30 and walked to the pantry. She pushed the door open an inch. The salt ridge held. The air that came out was cold enough to make her teeth think of rain. Then the house made a sound it had not made yet. Not in all the hours since she had opened the iron door. A voice. Not words. A shape of a word. A breath drawn in and then balanced on a knife whose handle she could not yet see. She should have closed the pantry. She should have. Instead, she went down, the lamplight walking ahead of her like a small faith. In the chamber, the brass disc lay exactly where she had set it. The dish of water held the small circle. The salt in the basin had settled into a flat that did not shine. The coil sat like a snake that had died in the act of deciding not to strike. Lark set the lamp on the table and said, "If you want a mouth, talk." The hum answered and arranged itself into something like a vowel. She stood there, one woman in one room under one house, and understood with a clarity that moved her knees. The ranch would not be sold, not to Mr. Lyle, not to the county, not to the kind of men who fix a problem by dragging it into daylight and calling it a curiosity. Harrowbone had in it along the land could not forgive. She had inherited it the way people inherit fevers, because someone earlier had been brave or stupid or both. "All right," she said. "You want to keep her. I can be that. But I don't bury boys. And I don't let men make themselves legends on my floor." The chamber did not agree. It did not disagree. It breathed once more and then held itself still like a creature that had chosen not to bite a hand that did not flinch. She turned to leave. The lamp guttered, then flared. The brass disc shivered in its rag. The coil sang once, high as a wire cut and released over a canyon. Upstairs, the front door opened without a knock. Boots crossed the threshold with the arrogant rhythm of a man whose paper had never refused to become a deed. A voice said a name Lark did not care to hear again so soon, and the house did not bother to resist. "Miss Delaney," Mr. Lyle called down the hall, not loud, because the men who can move armies with their signatures don't need volume. "We've come to make a different kind of paper." Lark set the lamp down and took the rifle up. She climbed the stairs as the pantry door breathed cold against her back. She stepped into the hall and saw Mr. Lyle by the table with two men behind him who didn't have the courtesy to be from yesterday. Between them, they carried a wooden box with iron handles and a lock heavy enough to keep a confession from escaping. He tipped his hat. "Evening again." "Not evening," Lark said. "Something else." "You're right," he said. "It's the hour when a thing either becomes a story or becomes a law." He nodded to the men with the box. "We'll be borrowing your pantry for a spell." Lark did not raise the rifle. She did not lower it. She looked at Mr. Lyle and saw everything that could be bought and everything that had never been for sale. She said the one truth she had earned since opening the iron door. "You can't make a law out of what's older than your courthouse." "Maybe," Mr. Lyle said gently. "But I can make a law out of you." He took one step toward the pantry. The house inhaled. The lamp on the table blew itself out. The hum under the floor found a note it had not yet dared. The mirror upstairs tilted and showed the chamber below without anyone touching it. Lark felt the cold come up her legs the way fear does when it is not your own. Mr. Lyle's men lifted the box, iron handles groaning, and turned toward the pantry door. When they took their third step, the floor between them and the door sagged as if a weight had been placed on it from below. Dust fell in a thin sheet. The boards creaked a sound that had not belonged to wood in 100 years. "Careful," Mr. Lyle said, voice suddenly thin. The boards split. The box dropped. The iron handles tore from the men's hands and the wood vanished straight down with a sound like a breath pulled through a mouth too small for it. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the mean jaw, who had come back despite being told to stay home by the look of his bad luck, stepped too close to the fracture and looked down. What he saw made his face go slack and his hands forget they were part of a man. He whispered something without sound and then stumbled back into Mr. Lyle, who caught him like a man catching an argument he did not wish to have. "Miss Delaney," Mr. Lyle said, not looking at her now. "What did you open?" "Not a machine," Lark said. "Not a well." She met his eyes. "A rumor with teeth." The kitchen light failed as if the house had squeezed its fist. From the pantry came the sound of salt cracking apart in a single line. Mr. Lyle took a step, not forward, not back. A step a man makes when there's no such thing as a right distance. And then the breath from below rose through the floor and into their mouths like a word none of them had learned as children, a word that would not let go until it had named them or they had named it first. The house exhaled. The pantry door swung, slow as a clock hand. And something on the stairs, something that wore the shape of a shadow without a person to cast it, put its hand on the bolt from the inside and began to lift. Lift. The bolt shifted as if a child on the other side had put two careful fingers to it and tested the give. Lark didn't breathe. She let the moment fill her ribs, counted to 3 in the quiet of her mouth, and set the 30 to 30 down so the wood but would not sound like a threat against the table. The pantry exhaled a cold that was not draft and was not weather. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The men flinched as if her words had weight. Mr. Lyle's hat brim cut a slanted shadow over eyes too smart to pretend this was still a negotiation. The mean-jawed man had lost his grin somewhere between the crack in the floorboards and the soft click the bolt made when it rose another finger's width. "Don't touch that door," Lark said, and she did not raise her voice to do it. The sound went out like a command a body recognizes from birth: stand, breathe, wait. She stepped to the threshold and laid her palm flat to the wood. The grain under her skin felt like a horse's neck, warmth under cold, some vast and sensible animal asking whether the hand meant brush or bridle. "Miss Delaney," Mr. Lyle said, too quiet for his men and exactly loud enough for her. "If there's a way to put it back to sleep, I'd be obliged to learn it now." "There is," Lark said. "But you can't help me if you don't know how to be quiet in your bones." The bolt lifted another quarter inch, then hesitated like a creature surprised to find resistance on the other side of its own intention. Lark pressed her palm more firmly to the wood. The chamber below made that vowel shape again, and the cold pressed against her like a calf's nose searching along a fence for the one forgotten gap. "Back to the wall," she told the men. "Hands where I can see them and nowhere near your names." It did not make sense as advice. It made the right shape anyway. The mean jaw pressed his fists to his pockets because he could not think of anything else to do with them. The second man, broad-shouldered, set his fingers flat along the plaster as if the house were a cliff edge he intended to trust because the ground had stopped offering better plans. Mr. Lyle folded his hands as if for prayer and then forced them open. Lark spoke to the wood the way you speak to a horse who inherited a bad memory that was never his. "You're not a door," she told it. "You're a gate we borrowed the name off. Stay shut." The bolt stalled. Then settled, not down but not forward either, like a decision withheld. She eased her palm away and felt the cold ease with it. The breath under the floor found lower ground. The quiet that followed was not peace, only the thin place between questions when nobody trusts the next answer yet. "All right," Mr. Lyle said, his breath fogging in the kitchen air though no winter lived outside. "Say your price." "The price," Lark said, and hated the taste of the word in her mouth, "is that you leave. Now. You don't come back tonight. You don't fetch more men. You don't try to pry out what doesn't wear your name." "And tomorrow?" he asked. "Men who make paper wake tomorrow. And the kind who don't, do too. Tomorrow we feed it right, and we learn its manners," Lark said. She picked up the rifle and rested it against her thigh. "Tomorrow you come alone, if you come at all. We'll write something both of us can live with that keeps boys out of the ground." The mean jaw found his voice. "You ain't sheriff." "I'm keeper," Lark said. "Which is older than sheriff by as many years as it takes to grow a fence post from a seed." Mr. Lyle's eyes thinned in thought, not anger. He glanced once at the cracked boards where the iron-handled box had vanished, then at the pantry door, then at the salt seam like a bright thread stitched badly and on purpose. "Men will say I ran," he said. "They'll say anything," Lark said. "And then they'll drink water that doesn't sour their mouths because you did the thing that saved them." It wasn't enough, but it was what he had. He nodded once. "I'll be here at noon," he said. "No boys. No box. If I bring anyone, it'll be a man who can keep his hands off his legend." "Bring your paper," Lark said. "And your hat in your hand." "Hat stays on," he said, but the words were only habit. He left with the broad-shouldered man. The mean jaw hesitated at the door long enough to let hate try to find words. When it failed, he spat on the threshold and jumped at his own bravery. He followed without looking back. The kitchen breathed again like a room that had been holding itself to keep from speaking. Lark slid the bolt across the pantry door and pressed her forehead to the wood until the cold there soaked far enough into her that it felt like sense instead of warning. After a time she did not count, she straightened, stoked the stove, and made coffee because coffee is a thing your hands know when your mind doesn't yet. She sat. She drank. She listened to the house and to her own beat into the shape beneath the floor like a thought that had finally learned how to sit without pacing. By first light, the cold retreated back under rock. By second, the flies returned like bad counsel but honest enough in their intentions to be forgiven. Lark washed her cup and went to the study. The ledger lay where she had left it. She read the careful hand again, truly read it this time, not for fear but for instruction. When the air bends, the body remembers how to follow it. Tie yourself to a true thing. Salt is good. A person you love is better. But love is a leash that slips. Use salt. If men come, give them a fence to throw themselves over that is not the real fence. They tire. It does not. It will learn your name. That is the danger. It will not say it out loud. That is the other danger. If it begins to keep you the way you keep it, go to higher ground and do not come down for 3 days. Tom's ear on the disc was not the first mistake. Watching men is the first mistake. Listening to them is the second. The right mistakes save children. The wrong ones cost them. Lark closed the book and took a breath that made her shoulder joints ache in that way fear tends to relocate itself when you have told it can't have your lungs. She saddled Cricket and rode the perimeter while the day lifted its shoulders. Out at the east fence, a jackrabbit regarded her as if she were a new fence post. In the south pasture, the mesquite sauntered their green in the lazy way of plants that aren't being asked to do much work yet. At the north ridge, the sinkhole sat like a coin a child has pressed into wet bread, imprint more than presence, its dust ring undisturbed. Only once did the ground show her something she wasn't expecting. Near a limestone slot where rain ran when rain admitted itself, she found a circle of pebbles too perfect to be accident. 10 inches across. Blue chips like chips from sky, turquoise, alternating with pale limestone. In the exact center, a black bead no bigger than a calf's tear. She dismounted, knelt, and picked the bead up between forefinger and thumb. It wasn't bead. It was seed. Not plant. Not stone. Something that had learned to be both. When she set it back, the ring of stones made a new shape, as if the world had been waiting all morning for someone to move one small pebble so it could tell the rest of the story. Names are leashes, she told the ground. You can keep yours until you need me to pull. Cricket snorted. Lark stood and pressed a palm to the mare's neck. You're not wrong, she said. It's a lot of leashes for one pair of hands. They were back at the house by late morning. Lark pumped water, washed the dust from the mare's flanks, and set a pan of biscuits because hunger is a poor counselor and she intended to be well advised. At noon, Mr. Lyle arrived on a bay with the patient eyes of a horse that had been introduced to mortality in the proper order. He dismounted without drama and tied the reins with a respect for leather that told Lark more than his boots did. He carried nothing but a folder wrapped in twine and a fountain pen the size of a small knife. No men, he said. No boys. No box. And no hat in your hand, Lark said without heat. He touched the brim. We negotiate what we can live with, Miss Delaney. The hat is sometimes the last thing a man has between his scalp and a worse idea. They sat on the porch steps because the kitchen felt too crowded with last night, and because the front of a house is the place where the world can watch you promise. He opened the folder. Contracts nested inside like nervous birds. Deeds. Liens. Proposals written in the kind of language that avoided verbs as if verbs were admissions. Here's what I can do, he said, and he did not lie with his tone. I can make the county look the other way because looking straight at what's under your pantry will force men who don't know how to stand still to invent a reason to move. I can keep investors from thinking Harrowbone is a vein of something they can mint. I can frame this as a heritage question. Heritage, Lark said. You mean a fence made out of pretty words men are too embarrassed to knock down in daylight? Exactly, he said. In return, you convince me, and later, other men, that nothing here will spill onto the road and take a child who did not volunteer. Lark considered the disc below, the coil like a nerve, the salt basin, the patience of the carved circles. She thought about the boy Finn, the way his breath had hitched and then steadied when she told him she didn't bury boys. She thought about Elias's ledger and the woman's careful hand before his. I can't promise what isn't mine, she said. I can only keep what's got my name on it from learning any names it shouldn't. That, Mr. Lyles said, is the best sentence I'll get from any rancher this year. He set the pen in her palm. Write what the land will honor, and I'll sign what I can live with. Lark placed the paper across her knee. She wasn't practiced at contracts, but she knew livestock bills, the way a man could stitch a price to a hide and call it fair because everybody did. She wrote in a block hand that had gotten her through the kind of schools that don't have walls. The undersigned agree that Harrowbone Ranch is under custodial care by Lark Delaney for the public safety and the good behavior of water, stone, stock, and story. That no persons other than those named by the keeper will enter the pantry or the cellar under it. No digging on the North Ridge without keeper's say-so. That the county will call this place historic and sacred, which means nobody touches it without the kind of paper that takes a year to write and 2 to read. That any financial consideration to any party shall not bind the mouth under the pantry to any name but the keeper's. That if the mouth learns a new name, all parties will admit their ignorance and stand behind the keeper until someone better earns the job. She signed. She handed the pen to Mr. Lyle. He read it with a mouth that thought it might smile and decided against it. Then he signed. You'll get a kinder draft tomorrow, he said, but this'll do for men who respect pencils. Paper is a fence, Lark said. The ground recognizes better wood. Sometimes, he said, and looked past her shoulder into the square of kitchen darkness where the pantry door sat like a patient under an Afghan. Sometimes paper holds long enough for a woman to do the work paper can't. They shook hands. His was cool and dry. Hers was warm from the coffee cup she'd kept near for the pleasure of heat. He left without speeches. The dust his horse kicked up lay back down as if it had been told to mind itself. Lark took the paper to the study and set it beside the ledger. Paper and paper. 2 kinds of witness that disagreed and still managed to keep a boy from dying by accident. Afternoon burned itself slow and large across the limestone. Lark fixed the pump, oiled the kitchen door hinges, and mended the saddle skirt where a nail had worked loose. She did not go down to the chamber because the chamber would still be there at dusk and at midnight and at the hour she woke up with her heart hammering a word she would not own yet. At sundown, Finn returned without apology and with a small pail of nails and 2 lengths of wire he had coiled with a care his hands had not learned from his father. He handed them over and stood on the porch without looking past her shoulder into the house. Pike's home, he said. He told Ma you were a witch. What did you tell her? Lark asked. That you ain't, he said, then added, after a pause, and that if you are, you're the kind that fixes wells. That'll do, Lark said. You eat? He shook his head. She set biscuits and beans on the step between them because food on a threshold is a kind of contract older than paper, and because boys stay when you feed them and leave when you don't. He ate fast and then slowed like a colt taught to pace by a hand that didn't punish. When he finished, he wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist and looked at the pantry with the open fear of someone who knows where his own curiosity stops. Want to see it? Lark asked. No, he said. Yes. Which one is going to keep you out of the ground? The no, he said. Then that's the one, Lark said. You can sit with your back to the door while I go down. If I yell, you run to Doc Trammell and you don't stop running till the doc takes your collar. He nodded, face pale and set the way a body sets its jaw when it has decided to obey itself. Down in the chamber, the air greeted her like a book left open on the table. The hum had settled into a low thread, present the way a scar is present when weather drops. Lark lit the lamp and set the flame small. "All right," she said. "We fed you wrong yesterday and not at all last night. We'll feed you right now. Then we'll see what your manners are when a woman tells you them." She took the coil's head in both hands and felt the pressure against her palms like rain that hasn't decided to fall yet. She turned it a hair clockwise until the brass disc trembled in its rag. The channel from the basin to the grate brightened as if the wall had remembered an old lesson. Lark poured salt into the basin, not a ring this time but a spiral, 3 turns, each tighter, each measured by her thumb width and the second knuckle of her smallest finger because rulers lie about edges and hands do not. "Eat this," she said to the chamber. "Eat only this." The air flexed. The flame leaned toward the basin and then away as if trying not to be rude. Lark stood with her palm against the table and counted to 100 twice and then a third time, because numbers are a way to distract terror into miscounting itself. When she lifted her hand, the salt lay flatter and the brass disc was cool. The dish of water showed her face in no circle. The hum had sunk to the floor like a large dog convinced by voice alone that it would be more comfortable on the rug than the couch. She let her breath out slowly. "Good," she said, and felt foolish for speaking praise to something that had not yet earned it and then less foolish when the lamp flame steadied as if the room liked to be told when it had done a thing properly. Upstairs, Finn's foot shifted. The house carried the information without judgment. Lark climbed back up, shut the bolt, and set her back to the door beside him. "Still breathing," she said. "Me or it?" he asked. "Both," she said. "Good sign for both of us." They sat a while. He asked about cows because a boy needs a subject to keep from making a myth out of his own fear. She told him the true names of 3 weeds and why cattle eat them when rain is late. He listened with a precision that made her want to hand him a fence line and a month of wages. Night came with a long deliberate step. The stars opened slow, as if the basin had to negotiate them with each point of light. The owl returned to the cottonwood and hooted once to mark that this, too, was a kind of contract. Somewhere between the second hoot and the quiet that follows men home from the saloon, Mr. Lyle's bay came at a canter and stopped in a hard breath at the fence. The man himself rode doubled over, and the way he dismounted told Lark what his pride would not, he needed help. She met him at the yard. His left sleeve was dark to the elbow. He had wrapped a handkerchief around his forearm and then another and then tied them with his teeth. Blood found a way anyway. "Who?" Lark asked, catching him by the elbow. "Not who," he said. "What?" He nodded toward the north ridge. The rock breathed and the fence posts leaned into it. "I sent my hired men home. I thought I could tuck it back to sleep by myself. It bit." The word cost him. "Inside," Lark said. "Finn, boil water." They laid Mr. Lyle on the kitchen table because it was the only surface whose history did not argue with the present. Lark rinsed the wound and saw that it was not teeth and not iron and not knife. It was pressure. A bruise with an edge and a pattern, a ring inside a ring inside a ring. She had seen that shape in the carved walls. "It marked you," she said, before she could stop her mouth. "It learns names," your ledger said, he replied through his teeth. "Does it write them too?" "Not if I can keep it from turning my table into a register," Lark said. She set her jaw and cleaned what she could and bound what she couldn't and kept one palm on the skin near the ring while the other hand worked, whispering the kind of nonsense men mistake for prayer and the kind of fact land hears without argument. When she finished, Mr. Lyle looked gray but steadier. Finn poured coffee. They drank it like medicine. The kitchen felt warmer without making a production of it. "What did you do to wake it?" Lark asked. He swallowed. "I stood over the sinkhole and said your name out loud. I thought, if it knows your keeper, it'll settle." He shook his head. "Instead it reached for me like I was a stolen bit of you." "Don't say my name near it again," she said, more sharply than she meant. He nodded once. "You have it now," he said. "Whatever I thought I knew how to manage, I don't. I can keep men off your porch and off your ridge. I can sew paper fences. But the thing under the pantry listens to a language my pen never learned. You keep your side, Lark said. I'll keep mine. A wind lifted and ran along the veranda boards like someone's hand skimming a washboard. The pantry door cooled. Mr. Lyle's eyes closed, then opened in that cautious way a body checks to see if it is welcome to keep staying. If I don't make it to morning, he said, practical as a ledger, Pike and Finn have a mother who can't take another grave. You'll see to it. You'll make it, Lark said. But yes. He slept. Finn sat with his back to the pantry and his head on his knees. Lark stood at the sink with her hands flat to the porcelain and her eyes on the night, which had taken up residence just beyond the window with a patience she recognized. The first sign that morning would not be kind came as a tremor under her fingernails. The second was a sound in the drain that would have been water in any other kitchen, and in this one was something else finding a small instrument to speak through. She lifted the kettle and poured a thin stream of water into the basin. The sound stopped, then returned in a higher note. The hair on her arms stood at attention again. Enough, she told the house, which was polite in all the ways a body could ask and none of the ways that mattered. If you want feeding, you will be fed. You do not beg in my sink. The sound faded, but the tremor stayed under the boards like a promise someone had been foolish enough to write in the first person. They ate bread and beans in a quiet that made chewing feel like carpentry. Mr. Lyle sat up, pale but stubbornly intact. Finn washed the cups and dried them with a square of flour sack that had been washed so many times it had forgot it ever had flour in it. Today, Lark said, you both leave before noon. You go by the south road, not the north. You don't look back at the ridge. You don't say my name or the ranches or each other's. If a man stops you, you say you're taking a cow to a neighbor and you keep moving. If a man with a badge stops us? Mr. Lyle asked. You say the same thing, Lark said. Badges are men under their hats. And you? Finn asked. I go down, Lark said. I tell it the terms. What terms? That it doesn't write names, she said. That it doesn't swallow boxes. That it eats what I bring and nothing else. That if it needs a story, it takes mine and leaves yours. Finn's mouth opened. Then shut. Then opened again. That ain't fair, he said. It's the only kind of fair that works, Lark said. The kind a keeper can afford. They left with the careful bravado of men brave because a woman had told them when to be. The yard took their shapes and gave them back to the morning. Lark watched until dust and light made one color of them. Then she opened the pantry. The salt seam had cracked in one finger width, as if something below had pressed its tongue to the line and found it unsatisfying but informative. Lark knelt and mended it with a spoon and a care that would have looked like reverence if anyone had been there to mistake it. She unbolted the door and eased it inward on its hinges. The cold rose. The chamber waited. She descended. At the bottom of the stairs, the iron door stood ajar the way a door stands that has been told it's not allowed to be a wall but may still pretend to be furniture. Lark pushed it open and stepped into the carved geometry the way you step onto a church's tiled floor when your grandmother told you once that tiles remember feet. Terms, she said. Listen. She spoke to the room and to the thing inside the room and to the line under the ground and to all the names that hadn't learned yet they belonged to anything. She said the sentences she had practiced against her own tongue. You breathe only when I say. You feed only when the basin holds salt and the dish of water sits still. You will not press your mark into living skin again unless I lay my palm down and tell you to take it there. The hum rose and fell like a horse's chest when a thunderstorm hangs north of the fence line and chooses not to leap it yet. The brass disc cooled further. The dish of water shivered and then steadied. The coil warmed and held steady under her fingertips. And one more, she said. You learn my name. It's time I learn yours. Silence. She waited. The carved circles did not light. The grate did not sing. The basin did not crack. When she put her ear near the disc, near, not on, her bones spoke back to her in that low vowel it had been practicing since yesterday. She heard a word, but it wasn't a name. It was a shape pressed into her, the curve of a letter that could not agree to be one language or another. Not machine. Not animal. The kind of word a valley gives to wind and then forgets it gave. I'll call you breath, she said. Until you tell me different. The room did not disagree. The water's surface plucked one small circle and smoothed it like a hand smoothing a horse's mane after a foolish jump. Breath, she said. Terms. Above, on the kitchen floor, a boot scraped wood. Lark froze, the lamp held between finger and thumb so the flame would not learn fear from her. A man's voice, low, careful, said her name. Not Mr. Lyle. Not Finn. She knew the shape of both those men and the way the house carried them. This voice had not earned the house's patience yet. Miss Delaney? The floorboards made maps for her. 2 sets of boots. One soft, one heavy. The soft ones knew how to keep a heel from telling on them. The heavy ones had never tried to walk like a roomer. She set the lamp down and climbed. At the pantry door, she paused long enough to touch the salt with a fingertip. Then she stepped into the kitchen with the rifle low. Sheriff Cawley tipped his hat. He had the kind of mustache a man grows to make his mouth look like a decision. Behind him, a deputy stood with his hands folded over the belt buckle that kept his courage in one place. Ma'am, the sheriff said. We had a report of disturbance last night up this way. A box fell through a floor. Some men saw lights where buildings don't hold candles after midnight. Men who don't farm love to report other men's disturbances, Lark said. Keeps them from measuring their own fences. We also got a report, he said, and his eyes went to the pantry door like a good dog that can't help looking where the meat lives, that a woman has taken possession of a property that likes to hold on to rumor. Rumor's cheap, Lark said. You'll need a warrant to afford it. Ma'am, he said again, patience creeping into his voice like a stitch into torn cloth, this conversation goes smoother if we don't rehearse the ugly parts. I don't rehearse, Lark said. I ride. He smiled with one corner of his mouth at that. Mr. Lyle said you'd be like this. Mr. Lyle kept his paper side of our bargain, Lark said. You do the same with your badge. He nodded once, as if that had been the line he wanted to hear her say. Then all I need from you is your word that whatever's under that door won't pour out on me and mine when I sleep. You have it, Lark said. Today. And tomorrow, he asked, same as Mr. Lyle. If I live, she said, it has it tomorrow. Fair enough, he said. He tipped his hat again and turned to go. At the threshold he paused and looked at the crack in the boards. Patch that, he said softly. Men trip when they're trying to look brave. When they had gone, the house's shoulders dropped. Lark slid the bolt back across the pantry and rested her head there just long enough to remember how she liked the smell of iron when it did its job and then forget everything else she liked the smell of. She slept 3 hours with her cheek on her forearm and woke to dusk. When she stood, the world swam sideways. She caught herself on the table and swore at the way bodies insist on being bodies no matter how many times you have told them they are land. Down again. The chamber greeted her with a quiet that felt like compliance and might have been cunning. She set the lamp down and poured a spiral of salt. The coil was cool. The brass disc was indifferent, which is the most polite a dangerous thing can be when it is not actively deciding. The first scream reached her through stone. It wasn't human. It wasn't calf. It wasn't anything a sane ranch keeps in its inventory. It came from the ridge. The limestone grin on the west side of the property, ran under the floor of the chamber like a dragged chain, and exited the north wall headed toward the sinkhole with the urgent understanding of water trying to go downhill through rock that has finally remembered how to say yes. Lark ran. The sky over the ridge boiled the way a storm does when it is being poured out of a jug instead of built from vapor. Her boots found the trail before her head had decided which one she meant to take. She slid down the wash feeling the place under the ball of her foot where leather wears thin and thought about the exact cost of falling on limestone when a thing has decided to turn gravity into a mouth. At the sinkhole, the dust ring had lifted again. It hung an inch above the ground, trembling. The cable under the soil pulsed without moving. The air shivered. The mesquite bowed their heads and did not know which god they were kneeling toward. On the far side of the hole, Pike stood with a shovel and a look no boy wears in daylight. At his feet, a sheepdog lay with its paws over its ears. It had come from the neighbor's place to narrate the end of the world and had found itself ill-prepared for a speaking part. "Back," Lark said, and Pike moved without asking how far. She took one step toward the hole and the ground dropped, an inch, two, then rose again as if breathing. The dust ring fell and lifted. Fell and lifted. In the chamber, the lamp would be sliding in its own small rings across the table and the brass disc would hum in that pitch humans hear with their kneecaps first. "What does it want?" Pike asked. "Something I'm not going to let it have," Lark said, and she did not whisper. "How do you know?" he asked. "Because it was polite this morning," she said, "and things that are polite before noon are hungry by dusk." She knelt, pressed her palm to the dirt, and said the name she had given it. "Breath." The ground steadied. The ring of dust fell and stayed and then rose again once, testing. "You eat through the basin," she said. "You drink through the dish. You do not eat my ridge." The dust fell. The sheepdog moved one paw from its ear and looked like a creature who had just remembered it had a name beyond fear. Pike exhaled and let the shovel's blade rest on his shoulder. "It listens to you." "It listens to salt," Lark said. "I'm just the mouth salt chose." They stood there until the sky had run its last color and the first stars had convinced the dark to stop making excuses. Then they walked back to the house together in a quiet made from relief and ignorance both. On the porch, the mean jaw waited. He stepped from the shadow of the veranda post like a borrowed anger returning to its lender. He had a gun in his hand and the kind of shaking in his wrist that belongs to men who bet their lives on other men's fear and discover at the last minute that the wrong horse has been saddled. "You signed paper with him," he said, chin-cutting toward town. "You shut out men who had the courtesy to tell you a thing was worth stealing." "I shut out boys who die trying," Lark said. "You ain't keeper," he snarled. "You're a clerk with a stove." He raised the gun. The dog at Pike's heel growled the way a rock might if it wanted a reputation. "Don't," Lark said. He didn't listen. They never do. He fired once. The sound cracked the porch into separate planks. The bullet took a splinter out of the doorframe and asked air what to do with it. The sheepdog launched itself and took a mouthful of Mean Jaw's wrist because sheepdogs do not need you to explain about fences. He screamed. The gun flew. Pike kicked it with a neat flick of his boot that made Lark amend her mental math about the boy's remaining childhood years. The gun skittered across the boards and fell through the crack the iron-handled box had left. The sound it made when it hit the cellar floor below was a lesson even the Mean Jaw could not talk over. "Get off my porch," Lark said. "Tell Mr. Lyle you've been demoted to whatever a man is before he becomes a bad idea." He went, cradling his wrist and bleeding ambition on the path. The dog sat and wagged once as if to say the chapter was closed except for the part where someone needed to praise him. Lark gave him the heel of a biscuit and the one word any creature understands from any mouth, "Good." She slept. She woke at nothing and everything. She went down and fed the basin salt because you do not deprive a thing simply because it has behaved for one evening. Morning brought a letter. Not in butcher paper. In a white envelope with her name spelt in a hand halfway between a preacher and a debt collector. She slit it and read. "Miss Delaney, if you are inclined toward formal stewardship, the college at San Isidro will pay a stipend for the privilege of not touching your ridge. We will send a man who knows how to stand still and take notes. He will not use hammers. He will not use his mouth unless asked." The letter was signed by a woman whose name rolled the way a creek does in a dry year, Dr. June Parada. There was a number at the bottom for the telegraph office. Lark set the letter next to the ledger and the contract and felt like a person who had accidentally founded a church when what she wanted was a barn that didn't kick. By noon, the sheriff returned with two men in plain coats. They stood at the porch steps while Lark explained what no hammers meant. They nodded as if the words had been spoken in a language their mothers had used to keep them from sticking forks into sockets. "Dr. Parada will arrive tomorrow," the sheriff said. "She'll want to see, not touch." "She'll get to listen," Lark said. That's the verb I'm handing out today. She took them as far as the kitchen threshold and no farther. She let them hear the quiet under the floor. She watched their faces arrange themselves into compartments where men keep the parts of themselves that know how to fear without becoming cowards. When they left, the house felt taller by a good inch. Afternoon settled. Pike returned with Finn and with their mother, a woman with the kind of eyes that ignored your face and went straight to your soul the way a hawk ignores your hat and measures whether you weigh enough to justify the stoop. She set a pie on the table without asking permission and put her palms on Lark's cheeks and said, "Daughter." Lark forgot how to be strong for a breath. Then she remembered and put the word somewhere it could do good and not harm. "Sit," she said. "Eat. Then I'll tell you what your boys volunteered for and what I'm resigning them from." They ate. Lark told the truth tilted toward kindness. The mother listened with a jaw that had survived worse than rumor and ears trained by a life where sound is a map, not entertainment. "Will you teach them fences?" she asked when Lark finished. "I will," Lark said. "The old kind and the new." "Then they can come," the mother said. "But you don't get their bones." "I keep those." "That's my rule," Lark said. "I don't bury boys." Evening again. Dr. Parada arrived with the last of the light, a woman in trousers and a long coat and a hat that said she had no interest in making men comfortable. She introduced herself with a hand that felt more like a promise than a greeting. "I hear you have a problem that refuses to be reduced to a specimen," she said, not smiling and somehow kinder for it. "I have a mouth under a pantry," Lark said. "And a ridge that learned to breathe." "Good," Dr. Parada said. "I'm tired of bones." She stood in the kitchen doorway and closed her eyes and said nothing for a long time. Then she opened them and nodded at the pantry door as if it had passed some exam. "We'll not go down tonight," she said. "We'll listen. Tomorrow, if it permits, I'll stand on the stairs and say the alphabet in 3 languages and you'll tell me which letters it hates." "That's a way to do it," Lark said. "Everything is a way to do it," the doctor said. "We only find out which ones keep the children alive by doing them slowly." They sat at the table with coffee and drew a map of the ranch in the old way, on the table with their fingers. Dr. Parada marked places with a knuckle, Lark with the heel of her palm, Pike with that eager single finger boys have when they are trying not to look too proud of being included. Finn listened like a ledger. The first knock came after midnight. It was not at the door. It was on the pantry from the inside. Everyone froze. Even the dog looked offended that the universe had misfiled a noise. Dr. Parada stood without haste. She walked to the pantry and put her ear to the wood with the kind of neutrality that convinces animals not to bite. She stood there long enough for Lark to count to 90 because 90 is the number a body goes to when 60 confesses it won't be enough. "It is not asking to be fed," the doctor said softly. "It is asking to be let out." "No," Lark said. "Agreed," the doctor said, as if Lark had finished a sentence they had begun when they were girls and didn't own enough boots. The knock came again, not louder. Closer. Like a neighbor who will not take the hint but also will not break your fence if you keep being firm. Dr. Parada reached into her coat and pulled out a small tuning fork. She struck it against the table leg and set it thrumming, then held it near the pantry door. The fork's note wavered, then steadied, then died as if someone had swallowed it. "It eats pitch," she murmured. "Like a throat that forgot how to sing and wants to steal the sound." "Then we don't sing," Lark said. "On the contrary," the doctor replied, eyes bright for the first time in a way that made Lark both grateful and wary. "We sing the wrong notes and teach it bad songs until it leaves our voices alone." They sang. Soft, under their breath, nonsense and lullabies an hymn Lark's mother had used on nights when cows were calving and Thunder sat on the fence with a knife between its teeth. The pantry knocked twice more, then went quiet with the sulk of a child who has discovered that adults have patience. At dawn, Dr. Parada stood on the stairs and said her alphabets. The chamber hated the hard consonants. It leaned away from K and T and P. It loved vowel. It bathed in O and U like a calf in a stock tank on the first real hot day of June. When she said L and R and M, it pressed itself to the walls like a dog leaning into the leg of the person who feeds it. It likes your name, the doctor observed. Not the shape of it on your tongue. The shape of it in your throat. It doesn't get to have it, Lark said. No, the doctor agreed. Names are leashes. We keep ours braided. By afternoon, the sheriff brought men with sand and cement. They poured a new floor where the box had fallen through, layer by thin layer, each one left to set while Lark and Dr. Parada stood with their palms on the pantry door and told the house stories about riverbeds and fence posts and biscuits because rooms need something to do when men with wheelbarrows go about their business. On the third layer, the pantry side. On the fifth, the chamber pressed its mouth to the grate and tasted nothing worth swallowing and sulked again. On the seventh, the cement took the impression of a ring, a circle inside a circle, before it dried smooth as if a hand had smoothed it. The sheriff looked like a man who didn't plan to remember that when he wrote his report. At dusk, Mr. Lyle came with a fresh contract tied with ribbon. It said everything the pencil paper had said and added clauses about sanctity and safety and the rights of keepers to keep. Lark signed. The doctor witnessed. The sheriff's mustache attempted to be neutral and failed honorably. Tomorrow, Dr. Parada said, we'll take the disc out to the ridge. No, Lark said. Yes, the doctor said gently. On a rope tied to your wrist and mine both. If it wants outside, we take it to a place where the sky can disagree with it in person. Pike and Finn stay home, Lark said. Obviously, the doctor said. This is a game for women foolish enough to be careful. They slept badly and woke quickly. Dawn found them at the pantry with a coil of rope, a canvas sack, and a prayer none of them admitted to owning. Lark wrapped the brass disc in oilcloth and set it in the sack and tied the rope around her middle and around the doctor's. They climbed the stairs and crossed the kitchen and stepped into the morning as if the morning had invited them personally. At the ridge, the limestone smiled its old impossible smile. The sinkhole watched without blinking. Lark felt the rope around her waist the way a horse feels a good cinch, notice and trust arranged in one line. Here, Dr. Parada said, and pointed to a spot where the rock held the memory of water. If it will speak anywhere, it will speak here. Lark set the sack down. She breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth the way a midwife had taught her once for a labor that never arrived. She untied the sack and unwrapped the disc and set it in the shallow bowl of stone that had been carved there by geology and patience and maybe by a hand if a hand had once wanted to pretend to be reason. At first, nothing. The sky held its breath because it had learned from watching the house. The wind wrote 2 letters on her cheek and stopped to see if she liked them. The doctor closed her eyes and hummed M and L and R under her breath like bait. The disc warmed. The stone warmed. The rope around their waists tugged once, not hard, like the kind of friend who insists you come dance and has never considered that some bodies don't. Say its borrowed name, the doctor whispered. Lark swallowed. Breath, she said. The ridge exhaled. The limestone flexed its thin skin. The sinkhole's dust ring lifted and held. The rope pulled. The doctor leaned back and Lark leaned forward because the world had decided to be both choices at once. From the disc's center, a sound rose that Lark felt more than heard. The water in her bones vibrated. The nails of the fence posts sang in a key nobody had taught them. The sheepdog sat and cocked its head and then put both ears back the way dogs do when thunder argues with itself. Now, Dr. Parada said. Tell it your terms again. Lark opened her mouth, and the word that came out was not English and not any other language she had paid for with cold mornings. It was a shape in her chest pushed out through her teeth by a will that knew it belonged to her. The disc answered. The ridge answered the disc. The sinkhole answered the ridge. The house answered the sinkhole. The pantry answered the house. The brass disc asked the question, and Lark said no in a tone that made cows return to the barn at dusk. The rope burned her waist through the fabric. Dr. Parada dug in her heels and hissed between her teeth, if it takes one of us, it takes both. It takes neither, Lark said through the ache. The disc cooled. The rope eased. The ridge sighed like a thing denied the last bite of a sweet. Lark lifted the disc out of the stone bowl and wrapped it in oilcloth with hands that shook only after the work was done. They walked back to the house without speaking because Victory is a skittish animal and remarks scare it. In the kitchen, Lark set the disc on the table and tied the rope to the leg into her wrist anyway because superstition is only sense that has not learned to be humble yet. Dr. Parada put a hand on her shoulder and breathed out something like relief and something like a beginning. "You understand," she said softly, "that this won't end with your porch." "I know," Lark said. "But it will start here until I say different." The pantry knocked once. Not asking. Acknowledging. They ate eggs and biscuits and the last of the pie Finn's mother had left because beginnings deserve sugar. The doctor cleaned her tuning fork and set it back in its case. Pike and Finn argued in whispers about who would fix the south fence first. The dog dreamed with his paws twitching. Afternoon came on easy. The sheriff stopped by and did not come in. He tipped his hat and said, "Storm tonight," and that meant both meanings. Mr. Lyle sent a basket with tea and a note that said, simply, "Keep breathing." The doctor laughed harder at that than the joke deserved, which meant she was tired. At dusk, the wind shifted. The first tumbleweeds crossed the yard with the insistence of evangelists. The sky stacked blue on blue again in layers too fine to separate. Lark tied the rope around her waist before she meant to and did not untie it when she realized what her hands had done. The first thunder had a flat sound, as if the sky were slapping water with the palm of its hand. The second rolled. The third spoke Lark's name without using letters. She stood. She lifted the disc. The doctor stood with her hand on Lark's elbow because sometimes that is the only place to stand that doesn't make the world worse. "Breath," Lark said. "Terms." The house inhaled. The pantry door swung wide as if a giant had lifted its hand off a child's chest. The iron door below groaned. The stairs began to ring, and the note they made was B, which is the note cattle find calm and horses find suspicious. The lamp went out without smoke. The dark in the kitchen was not absence. It was attention. Dr. Parada's fingers tightened on Lark's elbow. "This is it," she said. Lark nodded, though she did not know what this was and would have been ashamed to pretend. She set the disc on the table and untied the rope from the leg. She tied it to the pantry bolt. She tied it to her wrist. She tied the third loop around the doctor's waist. "Finn, Pike," she said, and they were already in the doorway with the dog at their knees and fear making men of them faster than she liked. "You run to the barn and you sit under the wagon and you hold each other's jackets until the storm passes. If a man comes, you do not go with him unless he says the word for the weed cows eat when it's too hot for anything else." "What's the word?" Finn asked, voice high. "Fillery," she said. "If he doesn't say it, you don't go." They ran. The door banged. The dog paused long enough to look back at her as if asking whether he should stay, then went because boys are born needing dogs more than dogs are born needing women. The house bent. The pantry exhaled. The iron door below made a sound like a coin spun on a stone table and caught before it falls flat. "Breath," Lark said again, into the sound and into the fear and into the old bone-tired knowledge that whatever you tame you also owe. "Terms." The ridge flexed. The sinkhole answered. The rope around her wrist tightened like a sentence drawing itself from subject to verb without asking permission for what came after. Something put its weight on the first stair. And something else, right behind it, answered with a weight that knew the price of ground. The pantry door drew a breath through its seam. The bolt lifted. And the kitchen went black as a mouth closing around a name it intends to keep. Keep. The rope jolted Lark's wrist hard enough to bite the skin beneath the knot. She held. Dr. Parada held. The bolt lifted another breath, then stopped as if a hand on the other side had remembered it was taught better. "Stand with me," Lark said, not loudly, and felt the doctor's shoulder lean until bone met bone and stayed. The kitchen smelled suddenly of rain over hot iron and of something colder, a smell like uncured stone, the breath of caverns that have never learned to echo because nothing living has bothered them enough. Another weight found the second stair. The house bowed, but not in surrender. In recognition. "Talk to it," Dr. Parada whispered. "Not with your mouth." Lark closed her eyes and set her palm to the pantry wood. She did not think of words. She thought of the slow honest chores of keeping, the weight of a saddle when you swing it from peg to pony, the way a calf's breath feels when it settles for the first time after a too long birth, the right angle for a post hole so wind will shame it less. The bolt settled lower by the quiet width of a fingernail. "Good," the doctor murmured. Again. Lark thought of salt, how it pours, how it cakes, how it does a job and asks for thanks only in dryness. She thought of boys' names she refused to let the ledger write. She thought of water finding the easy place in a ditch and the necessary place in a throat and the wrong place in stone. The kitchen breathed. The rope slackened a fraction as if a dog had reconsidered the leash. Then, from the stair, the other weight answered. It pressed up against the first with a steadiness that belonged to the same family as mules and midwives. It smelled like rain without lightning. It sounded like old boots choosing the next tread. It did not argue. It insisted. The bolt dropped back into its seat with a sound like a small victory nobody should cheer at because the work wasn't done. Lark opened her eyes. Dark crowded the room but had lost its knife. "You feel that?" she asked. "I did," Dr. Parada said, and for the first time, she smiled in a way that reached into the hurt under her eyes and cleaned it a little. "Something stood between you and your story and told the story to mind its manners." "Who?" Lark asked. "What?" "The good weight," the doctor said simply. "Whatever you've been calling to when you talk about fences." Thunder leaned its shoulder against the roof and pushed. The house groaned, then set itself. The rope went slack. The dark took a step back and became, once more, only night. On the porch, the dog barked twice as if to report, alive, accounted for. Beneath that sound, Lark heard the boy's laugh, thin, shaken, but laughter still. She let her breath go slow and long, then sank into the chair like a person who had come home from riding fence in wind that wanted its due and had been told no by cedar posts and habit. The storm emptied its pockets and then its silence. By the time dawn unrolled its pale cloth across the ridge, the kitchen had found its corners again. The pantry door sat closed with its bolt down. The rope cut a faint stripe in Lark's wrist that she would wear like a ring she hadn't married on purpose. "Coffee," she said. "Breakfast," Dr. Parada added. "I want the kind that convinces a body it has a right to keep being one." They ate eggs fried hard enough to remember the pan and biscuits with honey that had the taste of weeds only bees respect. Lark went down and fed the basin the right kind of spiral. The chamber breathed like a dog sleeping under a chair after a long day that ended the way it should. By mid-morning, Mr. Lyle appeared leading a mule stacked with groceries and shame. His arm was bound cleaner than yesterday. He kept his hat on. "I brought what the doctor scribbled," he said, tapping the list tied to the mule's pack. "And I came to say I kept men off your ridge. The ones who came in the night left when the storm remembered their mothers' names." "The storm will get credit," Lark said. "But thank you." He looked at her wrist. "That rope's not a bad idea." "It's the kind of marriage I can live with," she said. "No priest, no paper, knows when to let go." He laughed, then winced, then laughed anyway because sometimes pain doesn't get to edit the line. "There's talk in town," he said. "Two kinds. The kind that wants to bring in men with machines, and the kind that wants to name your place a miracle in charge admission." "Neither kind gets my pantry," Lark said. "I told them that," he said. "The sheriff told them too. For now they believe men who can afford to say sentences out loud." "For now," she echoed. "For now is all I can steward." They unloaded the mule. Flour, salt, coffee, bolts of canvas, a carpenter's chalk line, 2 lengths of chain, and a tin of oil. On the bottom of the pack, wrapped in newspaper that had learned every county lie before noon, lay a small Bible, inscribed on the flyleaf, "For whosoever finds herself keeping." Lark left it unopened on the shelf beside the ledger because sacred is a word with too many fathers. "Doctor," Mr. Lyle said with genuine interest sharpened by genuine caution. "You still mean to take that disc outside again?" "Not today," Dr. Parada said. "Today we teach it that basins are bowls and bowls are better than throats." They worked. Work is a fence for the thoughts that want to go into the pasture and break legs there. Lark taught Pike and Finn how to string wire so it sang low enough to warn a man with sense and high enough to shame a man without. Dr. Parada taught them how to listen to a room without being swallowed by it. The sheriff sat on the porch and whittled a stick into a shape the stick had not asked for but did not mind, and the dog fell asleep with his head on the sheriff's boot and pretended not to be a coward because men get brave when dogs consent to sleep. Near noon, a rider came hard from the east, hat low. He drew up short, left us to finish his sentence, and lifted a letter. "From San Isidro," he said. "From the woman with the wire hair." Dr. Parada tore the seal and read. Her eyebrows made two small decisions and then forgave the nakedness of being surprised in front of company. "The college recognizes Harrowbone as a natural laboratory," she said, a phrase that sat in the kitchen like a polite cousin who might stay the summer. "They will send no one but me without the keeper's assent. They will pay a stipend so the keeper can keep. They will ask for readings." "Readings," Lark said. "As if a wind could be taught letters and a stone could take dictation." "It can," the doctor said. "But we won't ask it to read a book that wasn't written for it." She folded the letter reluctantly, like a person putting away a knife she might need. The afternoon lengthened like grace. Finn's mother arrived with jars of pickles and the news that the mean jaw had left town in a hurry with his wrist bound and his mouth unkind as ever but shorter by 2 teeth. Lark thanked her and did not ask whether she had made that happen. Some courtesy is leaving a woman the right to be dangerous without making her admit it. Toward evening, the wind came from the north. Not a storm wind. A tuning wind. It plucked at fence wire and at nerves. It asked questions in a language the house had almost learned. The pantry answered once with a knock so soft it might have been a regret. "We feed it," Lark said. "Then we teach it a new lie." "What lie?" Pike asked, eager and earnest. "That stillness is good manners," she said. Down in the chamber, she poured a spiral, turned the coil of breath, set the dish at the notch beneath the smallest carved circle, and waited. The hum came, low, obedient. The brass disc warmed and then cooled with the relieved sigh of a fever that has finally decided it will take its blanket off. Lark placed the back of her hand against the grate and did not leave it there long. It was not a fire. It was a conduit. It felt like distant applause, all the claps arriving at different times because some of the people were still standing. When she came up, Dr. Parada had the Bible open, not reading. Listening. "I'm not a praying woman," she said. "But I'm tempted to steal some of their language so I don't have to reinvent it." "Language is fence too," Lark said. "Borrow any pole that holds." Night settled without argument. The stars came sure and bright. The dog snored, and the sheriff pretended he didn't hear because men like to call their naps vigils. Deep in the dark, the house woke Lark with a sound she knew from other lives, the sound of a horse refusing to cross a bridge. She sat up and the kitchen was already in her. She walked there with her bare feet finding the boards that didn't complain and laid her palm on the pantry door and felt it shaking like a creature that knows the wrong name is standing on the other side of a line holding a bouquet it did not pick. "Who?" she asked the house. The house answered in the way of houses, by leaning toward the west door. Lark lifted the rifle. She went by the west door rather than the front because the west door is for conversations you would rather not have with the sun watching. On the porch, a figure stood at the edge of lamplight. When he stepped in, she saw the face a person gets when he believes the light owes him a shade and that she should apologize for making him stand there alone with his own outline. Elias Calder, he said his name before she could, like a man invoking a charm against court orders. "You're dead," Lark said. "I was," he answered, and smiled with half a mouth and none of the soul that should ride behind a smile. "Then I was almost dead. Then the ground remembered me. Then it forgot. I walked." He looked like the ledger had sounded, angles for law and carelessness for the edges that cut hands. He wore a coat that had been oilcloth once and had become something else in weather that would rather eat than clothe. He smelled like rust without water. You built the room, Lark said. I found it, he corrected, because men like him always correct in the places they are wrongest. I taught it to sing. Behind her, Dr. Parada's breath collected in the doorway. Elias's eyes flicked to the doctor and then considered the pantry like a man measuring whether a window will hold his body weight when the law comes by the front. You left this to me, Lark said. On paper. I did, he said. Because I could not keep it and live. And I could not let it go and live. And I could not die and let it be kept by a man. He looked at her, and for a thin moment, something like respect flickered. It needed a keeper. And the basin has never taught a man that word long enough for him to hold it. What do you want now? She asked. To see if you have taught it better than I did, he said. To tell it a name it forgot. No, Lark said. It is mine, he said, without rancor and without shame and without hope of making that sentence true. It is not, she said, with the kind of quiet men mistake for mercy until it teaches them why it isn't. It never was. It isn't anything's. It needs a keeper because it cannot be owned and it harms what it does not understand. Elias's mouth pinched around a word he could not say without admitting he had come to ask permission. I know the turns in the salt, he said. I know how long to let the water stand and when to move the dish. I know how to pretend you can starve a thing into obedience and how to feed it until it loves you in the way bodies love their addictions. Then you know how wrong you were, Dr. Parada said, tired and more alive than she had been when the letter came. And why you had to write a child's name in a ledger as if his life were a unit of measure. Elias flinched. Good. If the ledger's woman had written boy, the man in front of them had written it in flesh. Lark stepped closer until the muzzle of her rifle was a question against his sternum. You will not go in my pantry, she said. You will not say my name under my floor. You will step off my porch and the ground will decide whether it remembers you. If it does, I will show you mercy you did not show anyone. If it doesn't, I will learn to live with that. He studied her face for the lie and found none. He laughed once, briefly, a sound like a spade striking rock. You are what the basin made when it finally learned a lesson, he said. All right, keeper. Show me how you keep. They stood with the thin dawn light making a blade out of the porch's edge. Lark backed to the pantry door and unbolted it, not to invite him but to invite something else. The cold rose like a hand up a spine. Elias gasped, not fear. Recognition. Breath, Lark said. Here is the man who called you by the wrong name and made you believe it was yours. The chamber answered with a tone that made all three of them taller and older and less inclined to say sentences with the word mine inside. The brass disc thrummed under the earth. The grate in the floor recalled its purpose. Elias took a step. Lark lowered the rifle into his line of travel and he stopped because men like him obey the tool even when they will not obey the mouth that holds it. You will not make your amends in my house, she said. You'll make them on your knees in the grass you taught to go brittle. She made him walk ahead of her to the ridge. Dr. Parada walked at Lark's shoulder with the tuning fork in her pocket and the good weight in her step. The dog came along because dogs write their own contracts and we signed them without reading it. In this instance that was exactly right. At the sinkhole, the dust lay flat and deceptive as glass. Lark set the brass disc and the oilcloth on a flat stone beyond the ring. Elias reached for it and she slapped his hand the way the world slaps a child who touches stove, not because of meanness but because of math. You listen, she said. You say what boys' names need to hear from your mouth. Then you leave. He knelt. It took him too long. Pride's hinge rusts when you do not swing it often enough. He placed his hand over the ring and did not touch it because even a man like him can be taught by weather. When he spoke, his voice belonged to all the men who have told all the lies and discovered on the wrong day that truth is easier to hold. Tom, he said. I did not keep you. The ground did not move. That would have been too generous. I did not keep you, he said again. And I told the story wrong after. I made your dying carry my legend. I wrote you down as a caution and not as a child and a man. The dust lifted, an inch, then fell. Elias bowed his head and the basin of his neck learned a shape better men had learned before him. Boy, he said, no name, because a ledger had been a knife once and names are the ribs it cut. I gave you to a mouth because I believed I could keep it if I fed it. I did not reckon with what a thing becomes when it learns the taste of skin. The ground sighed. Lark felt it under her feet like a tired ant shifting in a chair to make room for a niece who finally understood how laps work. She glanced at Dr. Parada, who nodded once, enough. Leave, Lark said. Elias stood. He looked like a man who had been pried open with his own crowbar. What will you do when it asks for you? He asked. Not cruel. Curious, and for the first time, in awe of a thing that wasn't himself. I'll say yes, Lark said calmly. On my terms. And I'll come back. On my feet. You think you're bigger than the ridge, he said. No, she said. I think I'm older than your lesson and younger than its hunger, and that is exactly the age a keeper has to be. He laughed again, softer this time, like a man hearing a song he would have liked if he had been taught ears. He tipped an imaginary hat to Dr. Parada and a real one to the dog, because even fools can tell who will speak well of them when they are gone. Then he turned and walked toward the scrub and into a day that had no more use for him. He did not look back. That was his last mercy to himself. The weeks that followed learned Lark's name the way honest work learns a hand. Men came, fewer and fewer. Some brought paper. Some brought guns. Some brought their mother's rosaries hidden in their coat pockets because superstition wears anybody's coat if you leave it on a hook by the door. The sheriff turned them away with the stubborn patience of a man sanding a board until the splinters agree to be fence instead of injury. Mr. Lyle learned to say the word keeper as if it were a title and not a joke. The boys learned to build corners square enough to embarrass the wind. Dr. Parada stayed through a moon's turn. She wrote numbers that only spoke sense to people willing to stand still long enough to hear them. She taught Lark to take the disc outside and inside and never let it taste skin. Together they learned which hours belonged to the basin and which to the house and which to neither. They taught the chamber to breathe on a timetable just enough to keep it from teaching them the shape of hunger. On a morning with frost on the shade of the fence posts and flies drunk on the sun that found them anyway, Lark woke with a word in her mouth that was not her word. She sat up, hand on the rope by habit and not because fear had her. The house waited. The word was not English. It was not the doctor's language, or the Spanish the boys used when they didn't want to be corrected, or the Latin in the doctor's books, or the old Irish her grandmother had hummed into dishwater. It was stone and wind and the patience of salt. It was a name that wasn't leash, because it belonged to the thing and not to whoever spoke it. She went to the pantry and laid her palm to the wood. Is that what you want me to call you? She asked. The bolt did not lift. The air did not change. Below, the dish's surface drew a circle and kept it. Yes. She said the word. It tasted like the low vowel and the M and the L and the R all braided. It tasted like water waiting at the bottom of a well for a face that would not fall in. All right, she said. We'll try it. But you do not write it in anyone else. The chamber breathed agreement. The coil warmed a degree. The grate sang just under hearing. She smiled without showing teeth to anyone and went to make coffee for everyone. By noon, the town had tired of being afraid in the same old way. They began to be proud instead. Children touched the fence and squealed when it hummed at their fingers. Women brought jars with nothing in them and took them home with water as sweet as Sunday. Men told stories about a keeper who could make the ridge kneel, and even the men who did not like women talking said the word keeper without spitting afterward. The registry at San Isidro printed a notice: Harrowbone, under the stewardship of Keeper Lark Delaney, stands as a site where stone and story consult. Access by appointment, hands by invitation, ears by default. That night, the pantry knocked once in delight. Lark let it. The dog woofed in his sleep as if dreaming of rabbits who had learned to use the gate properly. And then the thing Lark had been waiting for came, because peace only knows it is peace when it is asked to decide whether it wants to be interrupted. A man from the railroad arrived with a car full of engineers and an offer thin as paper and sharp as its edge. He wore a suit that had done more traveling than the sweat inside it. He set plans on the table and named money high enough to mortgage the way the town thought about itself. "We will drill," he said evenly. "Not right here. Out there." He pointed past the ridge toward land that wore other men's names. "If there is pressure, we will harness it. If there is steam, we will borrow it from the future and pay it back with a generator." "You'll wake what we've put to sleep," Dr. Parada said. "Or you'll prove you've been keeping a superstition," he replied, polite in that temple-clean way that makes a woman's hands itch for soil. "Either way," the sheriff said from the porch, "you'll need the keeper's permission to point any of your iron toward any of our holes." The railroad man smiled like a knife left out of its sheath. "The county wants progress. Progress likes to keep sheriffs employed." Lark listened to the room and the men and the ground. She watched the dog, whose hackles had risen without noise. She watched the boys, who were counting without being taught to count the number of men standing between the table and the door. She watched Mr. Lyle, who had learned to look at his hands when he didn't want his face to betray the side of a fight he'd chosen. "We'll take you out there," she said. "With a rope tied around your middle to mine. You can listen. If the ground sings you a willing song, we'll talk about borrowing its tune. If it bites you, we decide whether the taste was your cologne or your attitude." He laughed, careless. He said yes because men like him say yes to rope they don't believe has learned to pull. At the ridge, Lark tied him to her with the rope that had taught her wrist where it belonged. She set the disc in the bowl and said the name the chamber had allowed her. The rock lifted its thin skin. The sinkhole breathed. The railroad man's smile stayed, but his color left out the back and didn't come home. "You hear it?" she asked. "I hear wind," he said. "And I hear you women making yourselves bigger." She turned the disc a degree. The rope pulled. He stumbled and she steadied him because you save even the men you want to throw to lessons, since mercy is your way of not becoming what you keep in your basement. "Listen," Dr. Parada said, pity and scorn making allies in her mouth. She struck the fork. She held it near his chest. The note vanished into him like water into dust. "It eats pitch," she said. "It will eat the pitch of your drill. It will eat the pitch of your engines. It will eat the pitch of your men's voices until you are left with maps and holes and funerals." He tried to laugh and failed politely. "I'll take your word," he said. "For today." "That's all we give," Lark said. "One day at a time. In exchange, you take your maps back to your office and put them in a drawer. You tell your bosses this land has a keeper and a doctor and a sheriff in a town, and they can either send pies or go hungry." He stared at her long enough to decide that he would never win an argument that required the earth to take his side. He nodded once. He left with a goodbye that might have been respect if men like him had been trained to feel it. That night, stars bunched over the ridge in the way of cattle finding a warm corner. Lark fed the basin and spoke the name quietly, like a promise and not a leash. The chamber hummed and then fell still. The house exhaled. The boys slept. The dog dreamed. The doctor wrote. Lark went onto the porch and sat where the steps remember everything boots have asked of them. The night rose around her, full of small honest noises, crickets practicing law, the wind folding and refolding a page of sky, the slow creak of a windmill that had no head but still enjoyed its joints. She thought of the letter that had come in butcher paper and twine. She thought of the woman's careful hand in the old ledger and the lines cut in the chamber's walls. She thought of Elias on his knees and of men who showed up to be brave and left embarrassed and alive. She thought of boys' names she had not written anywhere but her own bones and the rule she kept under her tongue like salt: "I don't bury boys." "I won't bury you either," she said to herself, and meant all the versions of herself, cowhand and keeper and woman alone and woman among many. "I'll keep you." Behind her, the pantry knocked once. Not to ask. To agree. Years later, because the story had to learn how to be a life, people would come by and sit on the steps and ask to hear about the time the house breathed and the ridge flexed and a woman told it her name and taught it not to say hers back. Lark would pour coffee and point their eyes toward the fence line and the ridge and the porch, and they would squint and nod and say ah and oh and sometimes and then they would leave with jars that tasted like belonging. The boys would be men. They would build a school with windows that opened without arguing. The sheriff would teach a class there once a month on how to write reports that didn't lie. Mr. Lyle would pay for a roof and refuse to put his name on the plaque. Dr. Parada would go back and forth like a family member who has two houses because love breaks numbers without asking forgiveness. And the chamber under the pantry would keep breathing, on the right days and the wrong ones, and the keeper would keep it and be kept, which is what you call an even trade when you make it with something too old to sign paper and too young to give up. But that night, the night the dark grabbed for the bolt and found a hand on the other side of the door big enough and gentle enough to stop it, the story did not know what it would become. It only knew a kitchen, and a rope, and two women holding their ground, and boys under a wagon with a dog's shoulder pressed into their ribs, and a town asleep because someone was awake, and a ridge that had learned a word and had decided, for tonight, to say it kindly. Near midnight, a voice came from the pantry, but it was not the Chambers. It was human and small and shaped like a boy learning he could trust himself not to break. "Keeper?" Lark opened the door and found Pike there, hands full of nails, face pale with sleep but steady. "Couldn't," he said, unable to finish the sentence. "Needed to be where the keep is." "You are where the keep is," she said. "Go back to the wagon. Keep Finn, keep the dog. Keep the sky from falling with your breath." He nodded, took a breath as if the sky had obeyed him already, and ran. The house settled. Lark leaned her head against the pantry door and let the cool travel into her skull where the headache had been writing a letter to grief. It found nothing to mail. It left. She slept in the chair. She woke to eggs. The doctor cooked like a scientist, precise, surprised when what she loved did not behave but kind enough to forgive it before the pan needed scrubbing. They ate. The day opened. The first rider of morning carried a sack of letters and a folded newspaper with Lark Delaney, keeper, in a headline as large as the kind that usually belonged to war. "They'll come," Mr. Lyle said. "To stare and to tell you what it is you're doing." "We'll make them coffee," Lark said. "We'll teach them to listen. If they won't, we'll teach them to leave." He grinned and tipped his hat and found a fence to mend so his hands would not clap at a woman in front of witnesses. When the sun stood straight overhead, the chamber asked to breathe. Lark let it. The line under the ground drew a quiet, exact arc from the pantry to the ridge and back again. The brass disc hummed without heat. The basin's salt lay down and went still. The water dish showed her face without ripples and, behind it, the face of a woman who had earned the right to like the woman in the water. "All right," she said to the room and to herself and to anyone else we're foolish enough to be listening. "We're done making a rumor. We're going to make a way. No trumpets. No miracles. Just the slow, careful arithmetic of days: feed, fence, listen, teach." The basin returned to its choreography. The men with maps forgot the way. The boys learned to stand between things that wanted to name them and the names they had chosen. The town left pies and took water. The ridge flexed once a season when the sky needed reminding that it didn't own everything. The dog grew gray and dignified and learned where to nap so that no footsteps would step on him by accident. Mr. Lyle's arm healed and with it some part of him he had been nursing since he was a boy under a different ridge. The sheriff wrote fewer reports and sanded more wood. Elias Calder did not return, which was a kind of apology only the land knows how to accept. On the anniversary of the night the house went black and the bolt lifted, Lark stood at the ridge with the men and women and children and the doctor and the sheriff and Mr. Lyle and the boys. She said the name the chamber had given her permission to say. The ridge breathed once, softly, like a horse that has learned which hand feeds. The sinkhole's dust ring rose as thin as lace and fell as polite as prayer. They cheered like people do at a parade when the last wagon goes by with the children in it and nobody has fallen off. Then they went home and ate together because community is a word like rope, you can't keep it coiled in the shed and call yourself prepared. That night, after the dishes and the dogs and the small arguments about who got which blanket and where, Lark sat on the porch and wrote a letter. It was a short one. It said, "To whoever opens whatever door I closed for the day, this is what I've learned. Hungry things that breathe can be taught to do it quietly if you let them keep their dignity. Names are leashes but also bridges. Boys turn into men when you refuse to let the ground write their stories. A keeper is kept, or she isn't a keeper at all." She folded it and slid it into the ledger between the woman's careful hand and Elias's slanted insistence. She left the page unnumbered because numbers are a boast on the wrong day. In the morning, she rose as she always did. She fed the basin. She turned the coil. She drank coffee. She saddled the mare. She rode fence while the boys argued about the right way to set a corner and the sheriff pretended not to be proud of their clean angles. On the way back, she stopped at the sinkhole and set a biscuit on the stone, which is a thing you do for saints and dogs and sometimes for mouths that could eat you if you forgot to be kind. The dust ring rose and didn't take it. The dog, later, did. At the kitchen table, Dr. Parada read her letters and Lark read her quiet, and they shared the pie Finn's mother had sent without carving the slices properly, which is its own kind of sacrament. The pantry knocked once. Lark knocked back once. The house smiled in its joists the way a face smiles in old photographs when somebody says, "Remember." Out past the ridge, the desert went on. It kept its secrets and gave them away as needed, which is what you ask of any friend who has more silence than you and more time. Under the pantry, the chamber breathed. Not for menace. For continuity. Above it, Lark Delaney kept. And was kept. And the rumor, which had once had teeth, learned to be the kind of story you hand your children when they ask how to make a place theirs without breaking it. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.